Buenos días, ¿me escucho? La mensajera, Kennedy Flores, buenos días.
Buenos días.
Señora embajadora Luz Helena Baños, representante permanente
Madam
de México
Ambassador
ante la
Luz Helena Baños,
Organización de
permanent
Estados Americanos,
representative
OEA.
of the OAS,
Señor Steve Greener, director
Mr.
del
Steve Greener,
Departamento de Seguridad
Director
Pública
of
de la
the
Organización de Estados Americanos,
Public
OEA.
Security Department of the OAS,
Señor general de brigada, diplomado de Estado Mayor del Ejército de
General
México,
Brigade,
Marco
Brigade
Antonio
General
Álvarez
Marco
Reyes,
Antonio Alvarez
presidente del
Reyes,
Consejo de
President
Delegados.
of the Council of Delegates,
Damas y caballeros delegados de los países miembros y observadores de la Junta Interamericana de Defensa que
of
nos
the
acompañan de
IADB
forma
that are joining
presencial
us
y virtual.
in person and virtually,
Señores representantes de los importantes
representatives
organizaciones e
of the
instituciones
different
internacionales que el
organizations
día de hoy
and
nos
international
acompañan de forma
institutions that are
virtual.
joining us today
Colegio
virtually,
Interamericano de Defensa,
the IADC,
Departamento de Seguridad Pública de
the
la Organización
Department
de
of
los
Public
Estados
Security
Americanos,
of the
OEA,
OAS,
Fuerzas Armadas, Policía Nacional
Armed
y Fuerzas de
Forces,
Seguridad
National
de cada uno de
Police,
los
and
países
security
miembros y
forces
observadores de
of
la
each of
Junta
the member
Interamericana de
countries and
Defensa.
observers of the IADB,
Señores oficiales, suboficiales,
officers
que laboran en la Junta Interamericana de Defensa, orgánicos, representando a sus diferentes
representing
países.
your different countries,
Estimada audiencia que nos acompaña a través de los
esteemed
medios
audience who
virtuales
is
y nuestro
joining
canal
us
de YouTube.
virtually and on
Tengan ustedes
YouTube.
muy buenos días. Soy el
Good
coronel
morning
del
to you
Ejército
all.
de
I
Colombia,
am the Colonel of the
Óscar
Army
Gordillo
of
Quintero,
Colombia, Oscar Gordillo
jefe de la
Quintero,
sección de gestión de armas de
the
la
chief
Junta
of the
Interamericana de
Arms
Defensa.
Management
Desde la
Unit
histórica
of
Casa
the
del Soldado, les
IADB.
brindaré la
From the
orientación
historical
administrativa
Casa del
referente
Soldado,
a
I
nuestro
will
taller.
provide you with orientation
El seminario taller
for
virtual
our
previniendo
workshop.
el tráfico de armas de
Our
fuego,
virtual
municiones
workshop
y explosivos
preventing the use
ha sido
of
organizado por la Junta
explosives,
Interamericana de
ammunition,
Defensa
and
y la Organización de los Estados
firearms
Americanos, OEA,
has been
en
organized
su
by the
programa de
IADB and
asistencia para el
OAS
control de armas,
through their
municiones
assistance
PACAM,
program for the
en cabeza del
control
señor
of
licenciado
firearms.
Carlos Orozco, coordinador regional, y el
Carlos
señor Juan Carlos
Orozco, the
Melgar,
regional
asistente de proyecto.
coordinator and
En
also the
cumplimiento al
project
plan de
assistant,
trabajo de la
have
Junta
coordinated
Interamericana de
this,
Defensa
and in accordance with
2024,
the
en
IADB plan
concordancia a los
of
mandatos de la
2024
Organización de
and in
Estados
accordance with the
Americanos, OEA,
mandates of the OAS,
teniendo como objetivo fortalecer las
the
capacidades
objective is to
regionales y la
strengthen the
cooperación
regional
multilateral
capacities and
para prevenir
the
y mitigar el
multilateral
tráfico ilícito
cooperation
de
to
armas de
prevent
fuego,
the illicit
pequeñas y
trafficking
ligeras,
of firearms,
municiones y explosivos, mediante el
ammunitions,
intercambio de
and explosives
conocimientos,
through the
buenas
exchange of
prácticas y el
knowledge
uso
and
de
good
tecnologías
practices and the
avanzadas,
use of advanced
asegurando la gestión
technologies,
responsable y
thereby
segura de los
ensuring the
arsenales y
responsible
promoviendo la
management
estabilidad y seguridad en la
and
región.
promoting stability and
Este
safety
taller
in the
busca
region.
fomentar la
This
colaboración
workshop
entre países y
is
actores
looking to
relevantes para
promote
mejorar la gestión
cooperation
del ciclo de
between
vida de las
the
armas,
actor countries,
previniendo riesgos asociados a su
preventing risks
desvío o mal uso
associated to the
y
misuse
garantizando
of
que las armas
weapons,
estén bajo
and
control
guaranteeing that
estricto
the
y legal
firearms are
durante
under
todo su
strict and
ciclo,
legal
desde su
control during
producción
all of
hasta
their
su
cycle from
destrucción
the
o
production up to
desactivación.
their destruction or
Este
disactivation.
importante evento tendrá como moderador al señor Teniente de Navío
The
de la Armada de
moderator will
México,
be
Alfonso Flores
Tenant
Rojas,
Alfonso Flores
doctorado,
Rojas.
PhD,
He
posee
has a
estudios de
doctorate,
posgrado en
PhD,
disciplinas relacionadas con la defensa y la
in
seguridad.
disciplines related
Actualmente
to
se desempeña
security,
como subjefe de la División
and
de
he is the
Investigaciones del
sub-chief
Colegio
of the
Interamericano de
investigation
Defensa.
unit of the
Tendrá a cargo la
IADB.
conducción del taller,
He
previniendo
will
el
be
tráfico
leading
de
this
armas de
workshop
fuego, municiones y
preventing
explosivos.
trafficking of
Señor
firearms,
Teniente Navío
munitions,
Alfonso Flores,
ammunitions,
muchas
and
gracias. Tiene usted
explosives.
la palabra.
Please, Tenant, you have the floor.
Muy agradecido. Muy buenos días, miembros
Thank
del
you. Good
liderazgo de la
morning
Junta
to all of
Interamericana
the
de
members and the leadership of the IADB.
Muy buenos días, miembros del liderazgo de la Junta Interamericana de Defensa. Señora embajadora Luz Helena Baños,
Miss
señor
Ambassador
Steve
Luz
Greener,
Helena
y con ello
Baños,
al personal de planta y
and all of
administrativo de
the
esta Junta
staff,
Interamericana de
administrative,
Defensa.
the operational and administrative staff of this
Expositores,
IADB,
público presente y virtual. Es un placer compartir con
in
ustedes este
person and
significativo
virtual
momento.
audience. It is important for me to share this very important moment.
Las armas deben estar en manos
The
de aquellos que
firearms
tienen
must be
interés
held
en el
by those
mantenimiento del
who
Estado
have
y no en
interest
su
in
ruina y con las
keeping the
maquiavélicas.
state and not
Muy buenos días
ruining
a
it.
todos y todos los
This is a
presentes.
quote from
Les damos la
Maquiavelo.
más cordial bienvenida a este
Please
seminario virtual
welcome all
intitulado
to this
Taller
virtual seminar
Previniendo el Tráfico
entitled
de Armas de
Workshop
Fuego,
Preventing
Municiones y
the
Explosivos.
Trafficking of
El
Firearms,
objetivo del mismo
Ammunitions,
es
and
propiciar un
Explosives.
espacio de difusión
The
y
objective
transmisión del
is
conocimiento
to
para fortalecer
transmit
las
knowledge
capacidades
to
de
strengthen
cooperación
the
hemisférica en la
capabilities of
prevención y
cooperation
combate a la
in
proliferación,
prevention and
fabricación
combating
y tráfico
of
ilícito transnacional de
illicit
armas de fuego y
trafficking of
municiones
firearms and
desde una
ammunitions
mirada multidimensional.
from a very
Este evento
multidimensional
está dirigido
perspective.
a
This
representantes
event
de fuerzas
is
militares, cuerpos de
directed
policía,
to
guardias nacionales
police
y
officers,
organismos de seguridad
national
de los
guards,
países del hemisferio,
military guards,
y que
and
sirve a su vez
from
para
the
compartir
organisms of
experiencias
the
regionales
hemisphere in
con el
order to
resto del
share
mundo.
regional experiences with the rest of the
Agradecemos
world.
especialmente su
We thank
presencia, ya que
especially
la
your
colaboración
presence
interinstitucional es clave
because
para
the
enfrentar juntos los
interinstitutional
desafíos de seguridad.
cooperation is key to face all of these security challenges.
Preside la inauguración de nuestras actividades mi general de brigada, Marco Antonio Álvarez,
General of the
presidente
brigade,
del Consejo de
Marco
Delegados de la
Antonio,
Junta
is going to
Interamericana de Defensa,
preside
acompañado por la señora embajadora
by
Luz Helena Baños, representante
Luz Elena
permanente de México
Baños,
ante la
who is
Organización
the
de los
representative
Estados
of
Americanos,
Mexico for the
en
OAS,
representación de la Secretaría Pro Tempore de la
and
Convención
also in
Interamericana contra la
representation of
fabricación
the
y el tráfico
Secretary
ilícito de armas de
against
fuego,
the illicit
municiones,
trafficking of
explosivos y otros
firearms,
materiales
ammunitions,
relacionados.
explosives,
Y
and
el
other
señor
related
Steven Griner,
materials,
director
and
del
also
Departamento de
Stephen
Seguridad
Griner,
Pública de la
who is the
Organización de los Estados
director of
Americanos.
the Public
Para dar
Security
inicio a
Unit of
nuestras
the
actividades,
IADB.
cedemos la palabra a mi general de
And
brigada,
now
Marco
the
Antonio Álvarez.
Brigade General Marco Antonio Alvarez has the floor.
Muy buenos días,
Good
Su
morning.
Excelencia Embajadora Luz
Your
Helena Baños
Excellence,
Rivas,
Ambassador Luz Elena Baños
representante
Rivas,
permanente de México ante
the
la OEA
permanent
y
representative for the
representante de la
OAS,
Secretaría Pro Tempore
and
de la
also a
Convención
representative of
Interamericana
the pro
contra la
tempore
Fabricación
secretary
y el
against
Tráfico Ilícitos
the
de Armas de
trafficking
Fuego,
of firearms,
municiones,
ammunitions,
explosivos y otros
explosives,
materiales
and other
relacionados.
related materials.
Señor Steve Griner,
Mr.
director
Steve
del
Griner,
Departamento de
Director
Seguridad
of the
Pública
Department of
de
Public
la
Security
Organización de Estados
of
Americanos.
the OAS,
Señor Carlos Orozco,
Mr.
coordinador
Carlos
regional
Orozco, Regional
del Programa de
Coordinator
Acción
of the
Integral de
Program
Armas
of Wholesome
Pequeñas y
Action for
Ligeras de la Organización de Estados
Small
Americanos.
Arms and Light Arms
Señor Walter
from the
Murcia,
OAS,
asesor de proyectos
Mr.
del
Walter
Centro
Murcia,
Regional de las Naciones Unidas para la
Advisor of
Paz,
Projects for
el
the
Desarme y el Desarrollo
UN for
en
Peace
América Latina y el Caribe.
and Development in
Señora Sarah
UNDP,
Grant Clement,
and also Ms. Sarah,
investigadora del Instituto de las
investigator from
Naciones
the
Unidas
Institute of the
para
UN
atención sobre el desarme.
for Attention
Señora Frida
for
Thomason de la Oficina de Asuntos
on
de
Arming
Desarme de la Organización de las Naciones Unidas.
for
Señor
the
Capitán
UN,
de la Marina de
also
Guerra de
Mr.
Brasil,
Captain
Antonio
of
Carlos
the
Rebelo Loureiro,
Marine of Brazil,
profesor del Colegio
professor
Interamericano de
of the
Defensa.
Inter-American College of Defense.
Distinguidos participantes
Dear
del ámbito de la
participants
seguridad y la defensa.
in security and
Representantes de
defense,
los Estados miembros de la
and
Organización de Estados
representatives of
Americanos
the members of
y de
the
países observadores,
OAS and observer,
así como a todas aquellas
well
personas que
as
nos
everyone
acompañan
who is joining
en
us
diferentes puntos de este
in
continente
the different
y del
points of
globo
this
terrestre.
continent
Muy
and
buenos
of
días y
the globe.
bienvenidos.
Welcome.
Es para mí un honor
For me, it is an honor
darle la bienvenida
to
en
welcome
nombre de todos los integrantes
welcome
de
you
la
in the
Junta
name of all of
Interamericana
the
de
members
Defensa
of the IADB
y de su liderazgo, mi general
and
Richard Haycam,
in the name of
mi general
its
Flavio
leadership,
Luis de Oliveira y un
General
servidor,
Flavio Luis de Oliveira,
a este
your
taller
server,
titulado
and to this
Previniendo el
workshop
tráfico de armas de fuego,
of
municiones y
preventing the
explosivos.
trafficking of
Espacio de
firearms,
intercambio
ammunitions, and
académico y
explosives.
cooperación
This
que se
exchange,
realiza en el
educational
marco de nuestro
exchange,
compromiso
which
con
is
el
within the
esquema
framework of our
de
commitment
defensa y
with the
seguridad
scheme of
hemisférica,
defense and security for the
particularmente
hemisphere,
bajo los
particularly
lineamientos de la
under the
estrategia de
guidelines of the
seguridad
strategy of
hemisférica.
security for the
Este
hemisphere.
ámbito refleja la voluntad y
This
determinación
reflects
colectiva para hacer
the
frente a
will
los desafíos
to
que diariamente
face the
amenazan la
challenges
seguridad de nuestras
that
naciones,
are threatening the safety of
vislumbrando
our
siempre
nations,
una solución
always keeping in
conjunta y
mind a
coordinada que aborde la
solution
complejidad de los
that
problemas a
addresses
los
the
que nos
complexity of the
enfrentamos
problems that we are
diariamente.
facing on a daily basis.
La Junta Interamericana de
The
Defensa,
IADB,
en su carácter de asesor
in its
consultivo,
advising
técnico y educativo,
character,
ante la Organización de Estados Americanos
for the
y de sus
OAS
países miembros
and its member countries
se continuará caracterizando por su compromiso en la
will still
cooperación
be
hemisférica
cooperating
y se
for the
muestra hoy
here and
como
today
un escenario propicio para que
a
interactuemos en
very
este tipo de actividades
good scenario so that we participate
académicas
in this type of
y
activities,
prácticas que nos
academic and
permitan
practical
seguir
activities that
diseñando
will allow us
y
to continue to
aplicando
design and apply
estrategias hemisféricas
the
tendentes a
hemispherical
contener
strategies
amenazas continentales
in order
y
to
globales.
contain continental threats and
Quiero
global
hacer
threats.
mención también
I also would like to
que la
mention
proliferación y el
that
tráfico
the
ilícito de armas,
proliferation of the
municiones y explosivos
illegal trafficking
no es
of
un problema
firearms,
que afecta
ammunitions, and
solamente a
explosives,
un
it's not a
país,
problem that is only
sino que se
affecting one
trata de
country,
una
but
amenaza
it is a
que
threat
trasciende fronteras
transcends
y
the
que
border
requiere una respuesta
that
decidida
requires
y
a very
unificada
decisive and unified
en todo el
response
hemisferio.
in the entire hemisphere.
Y solo a través de este intercambio
And only through this
confiable
exchange
de lecciones aprendidas y el
of lessons
fortalecimiento de
learned
nuestras
and the strengthening
capacidades
of our capabilities,
podremos lograr los
may
objetivos
we
comunes
be able to
que tanto requerimos para
comply
seguir
with our
fortaleciendo nuestra
objectives
paz,
in order to
seguridad,
strengthen the peace,
desarrollo
security,
y
development,
estabilidad de
and
nuestras
stability
naciones.
of our nations.
Espero que todos los aquí
I hope that
presentes,
everybody here
así
present,
como quienes nos siguen
as
virtualmente,
well as the people who are joining us
encuentren en este
virtually,
taller la inspiración para
will
continuar
find in
trabajando
this workshop
juntos
the inspiration
con una visión más
in order to
ampliada
keep
y
working
coordinada
together
para
with a
enfrentar
wider
estos
vision and
retos.
coordinated vision in order
Con
to
estas
face these
palabras,
challenges. So
doy
with these
formalmente
words,
inicio a las actividades de
I
este taller.
start formally the activities
Agradezco
of
una
this
vez
workshop.
más a los
Thank you
señores y
again
señoras panelistas moderadores
to all
y
the
participantes
panel
por su presencia
members for
y
their
su
presence
disposición para colaborar y
and your
aprender juntos.
disposition for cooperating
Muchas
and learning
gracias
together.
y
Thank you.
deseo que este evento
And
sea
I wish that
productivo y
this event is
enriquecedor
very
para todos,
productive and enriching
que
for
nos
everyone.
comprometa a
And
continuar
also,
fortaleciendo
we are
y
committed to
fomentando la confianza y la seguridad
strengthen and
hemisférica.
promoting
Muchas
the
gracias
hemisphere
y bienvenidos.
security. Thank you and welcome.
Distinguidas y distinguidos organizadores y
Distinguished
participantes
organizers and participants of the workshop preventing the trafficking of firearms, ammunitions, and explosives. The name of the pro tempore secretary of the IADB against the trafficking of firearms, ammunitions, and explosives and other materials related, it is an honor to welcome you to this workshop. And the invitation is very timely since there's a lot of violence that in the American states. I wish to recognize also, acknowledge the Departments of Security and the IADB for driving this initiative, which responds to the interest of the member states of the OAS and for strengthening our capabilities in terms of preventing the illegal trafficking of firearms in our region. As you know, the violent death rates by firearms in the American continent are the highest in the world, which forces us to double our efforts in order to face this challenge in a decisive and coordinated way. In accordance with the World Study for Homicide by the UN against drugs and crimes, around 65% of the homicides recorded in 2021 in America, including the Caribbean, were perpetrated with firearms. Most of these firearms are trafficked illegally by criminal groups, transnational criminal groups, so therefore we can see the magnitude of the challenge. And thereby I invite you all to participate in this workshop in order to reflect on the recent initiatives for combating this problem. It is my pleasure to share that in the last meeting of the Committee of SIFTA this year, the states approved two key operating manuals, one for the destruction of light and small weapons, and the other one, it's about the physical security of arsenals. these manuals offer guidelines for the states in order to strengthen their processes of managing firearms and ammunitions, and thereby contributing to avoiding their illicit trafficking. Both manuals are available in the webpage of the convention, and you are invited to consult these manuals. In this workshop, we will address international cooperation for the wholesome management of the cycle of firearms and ammunitions. It is important to highlight the assistance program for weapon control and ammunitions that has been key in order to improve the capabilities of the states in preventing the misuse of firearms. And also you will explore the use of advanced technologies to counteract the trafficking of small arms and light arms, which is essential for the illicit trafficking, against the illicit trafficking of these weapons. Also, we will identify good practices for managing the life cycle, the full life cycle of firearms and ammunitions, which is basic to prevent their use for illicit activities. And also we will examine the new trends in trafficking and the illicit manufacturing of firearms and explosives in the region, which are providing us with ever more complex challenges. Also, finally, we will manage the risks in the security and storage of firearms and ammunitions, which is, if they are not managed appropriately, they may be reoriented for illicit use. So therefore, in these efforts in order to against trafficking of ammunitions and firearms will be successful as long as they are based in the principles of responsibility, common and shared responsibility. Therefore, we need to have a tight cooperation among all of the actors involved. The challenges that we are facing for this illicit trafficking demand the participation of all the states, academia, civil society, the private sector, and thereby Mexico does an urgent calling for the manufacturers and the distributors of firearms so that they adopt schemes for self-regulation and commercial responsible practices that help to avoid this illicit trafficking of these products. So I am also happy because this workshop will be a very good workshop that will allow us as a hemisphere to move forward on our challenges that we are facing. So thank you for your attention, and I wish you the success in all the work being developed. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por sus distinguidas palabras, mi general, estimada embajadora. A continuación, cedemos
Thank you
las
very
palabras.
much for your words, Madam Ambassador.
Quien dará unas destacadas palabras para enfatizar la
We
importancia
now
de estos actividades el día de hoy.
greet the Director of the Department of Public Security, who's going to give some words.
Muy buenos días.
Good morning.
Al congregarnos hoy para participar en este
Meeting
seminario
today to
preveniendo el tráfico de armas de
to
fuego,
participate in this seminar to prevent firearms, and allow me to work from the Public Security Department of OAS. I give you a warm welcome. This occasion is perfect to recognize and thank Mexico as pro tempore Secretariat of the Inter-American Convention against the Prevention and Illegal Traffic of Firearms. Your Excellency Luz Helena Baños Rivas, for maintaining at the helm the control of firearms and munitions in the agenda of the region. Our greetings to the Inter-American Defense Board and the President of the Delegate Council, Brigadier General Marco Antonio Alvarez. Our wish is from the DPS is to continue creating synergies with the IADB in favor of the hemisphere, particularly relevant for the region, as it is a control of arms, munitions, and explosives. The Department of Public Security, since year 2019, through the Program of Assistance in the Control of Firearms and Munitions and Explosives, has assisted 28 countries of the Americas and one or several components of the program that includes legislative assembly, marking and registry, physical safety and security, and destruction of firearms. In this sense, our appreciation to the European Union in allowing us to help the countries in the compliance of the obligations established in the CIFCA and to reach important outcomes that included, among others, assisting the countries of the region of the destruction of more than 3,700,000 munitions, 80,000 firearms that were destructed, 13 firearm depots and munitions in 6 countries around the region. 18 countries were strengthened with their capabilities in marking and registry, and with the participation of the IADB, we benefited 69 officials from 14 countries that were certified at the level OD3 in Spain in accordance to the NATO standards. Much despite all this, according to the Global Study on Homicides for 2023 of the United Nations in our region, it has the homicide global rate of 100 a million, and 2/3 are committed by firearms. The accessibility and proliferation of firearms continues to strengthen the organized crime. The effects that cause armed violence is not only expressed in terms of human lives, but also an additional cost for the health system. And from there on, the states of the country need to prioritize the combat of firearms traffic, given their link to drug traffic, terrorism, and transnational organized crime and other criminal behaviors. It is for this reason that it is fundamental to continue with the efforts to counteract the illegal manufacture, proliferation, and traffic of firearms, and carry out effective controls according to good international practices to reduce armed violence. In this sense, the OAS, through my department, and together with UNMERIT and SICA, is promoting the development of the roadmap of Central America to prevent the traffic of proliferation of firearms and munitions in accordance to the mandate of the General Assembly of the OAS. The roadmap of Central America seeks to be a practical instrument and participated that guides coordinated areas of all key actors. It is a strategy of the countries that establish common objectives with actions and concrete goals and shared priorities. We are hopeful that the countries of Central America and Dominican Republic are committed with this initiative. I also would like to thank UNODA, UNMERIC, and the Inter-American College for Defense for attending our invitation to work in this space, good practices and experience in the prevention of firearms ammunition. I also would like to thank my team, particularly PACOM and the IADB team, for the organization of this event. To conclude, I exhort once again the countries of the region so that they take advantage of the assistance that we offered within the framework of PACOM from the OAS. Our commitment is to continue accompanying you in the challenge to reduce the threat represented by illegal firearms for the security of the Americans. I wish you an excellent workshop. Thank you very much.
Buenos días. Gracias, Steven.
Good
Disculpas por la
morning. Thank you
interrupción,
very
pero
much.
no
Excuse me for the
estamos
interruption, but
teniendo el audio por parte del
we
maestro de
are
ceremonia. No
not
sé si me
receiving
escucha
the
usted.
audio from the master of ceremony. Can you hear me?
Disculpen, no estamos recibiendo señal de
Excuse
audio.
us, we're not receiving the audio signal.
Aún no le escuchamos.
We still cannot hear you.
Disculpen, continuamos con los problemas de audio.
We
No le
continue with
escuchamos
audio
todavía.
issues. We cannot hear you.
Estamos teniendo unos pequeños problemas técnicos. Agradecemos su
Having a
paciencia.
few technical problems. We thank you for your patience. We will be right with you.
Disculpen las problemáticas técnicas que hemos tenido.
Excuses for the technical issues that we had. We will continue. We want to thank the inaugurational words from Brigadier General of the Army of Mexico, Marco Antonio Alvarez Reyes, President of the Council of Delegates of the Inter-American Defense Board. Similarly, we would like to thank the words from Madam Ambassador Luz Helena Baños and Mr. Stephen Greener, who have given us some very warm opening words for the beginning of the event. I would also like to mention General Simón Bolívar, liberator of American nations, which a movement which is having firearms have given up independence, but only the laws will give us freedom. We are very pleased, organizers of the virtual workshop, to state that we're accompanied by more than 4,100 persons participating from more than 41 countries, of which we send a fraternal warm greeting during the course of the workshop. You can bring us your words in the channel that has been enabled in the YouTube channel, which will be answered during the first cycle of the question. In our agenda today, we will have the participation of Mr. Walter Murcia and Mrs. Sara Gran Clement. First of all, we would like to establish for you
unos breves anuncios.
a few brief announcements. It is important to establish that although we support all types of efforts in order to guarantee a safe hemisphere, the views and opinions expressed in this seminar are solely those of the presenters, do not necessarily reflect the position or perspective of the Inter-American Defense Board. To carry out a question from the excellent forum and persons that we have brought the following questions for you. What are the main emerging trends in the illicit traffic on firearms, ammunition, and explosives in the context of hemispheric defense and security? And how can current technologies strengthen transnational cooperation to more effectively combat these threats? We thank you so much for being here, and we shall start with our activities. First of all, I would like to introduce Mrs. Janaina Camelo Homerin of the Program of Assistance for the Control of Firearms and Ammunition of the Department of Public Security of the Organization of American States. She is a specialist of the Program of the Assistance for the Control of Firearms and Ammunition of the Department of Public Security of the OAS, specialized in penal justice, prevention of crime, and penitentiary reforms.
Desempeñó el cargo de
She
subcoordinador
worked as the subcoordinator of the program Haciendo Justicia, Making Justice, a collaboration between the National Justice Brazil Council and the Program of the United Nations for the Development. Also, she was executive manager of the coalition Rede Justicia Criminal in Brazil, and she has studies of the Masters in International Law at the University of Nanterre. Mrs. Janaina, can you hear us? Yes, we hear you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. And also, we shall give you the floor of the platform. We give you the floor so that you can present your slides. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll be here online. Once you place your presentation, we are hearing you loud and clear. And on your presentation of regional cooperation for the management. Thank you very much. And the floor is fully yours. It is a pleasure to be with all of you. And today, what we are going to talk about is about the regional cooperation of the management of the cycle of life of firearms and munitions, and what the OAS is doing thanks to the assistance program of the control of firearms and munitions called PACAM. To start, I would like to speak a bit about the context that we have in our region, which is a certain prevalence of armed violence. The Americas has the highest regional rate of homicide per 100,000 inhabitants, according to a global study published by the United Nations against Drug and Crime Office in 2023. Approximately two-thirds of the homicides are perpetrated with firearms, and 8 of the 10 countries with the highest homicide rates are in Latin America and the Caribbean. So, second point of attention is related to the transnational organized crime is one of the main threats to the security of the countries, and most particularly in our region. Central America and in South America are the main destinations of the world armed traffic. And we can see a link between the different modalities of traffic practiced by groups of criminals that operate in the regions, drug traffic, trafficking in persons and others, which ends up feeding the cycle of violence, and the organized groups facilitate the illegal circulation of firearms and use firearms to increase their power. In fact, with these 2 points, we reach a conclusion that it's important to count with coordination, intra-regional coordination tools in a coordinated and comprehensive manner. In the region, we count with the Inter-American Convention against the Manufacture and Illegal Traffic of Firearms, Munitions, Explosives, and Other Related Materials, CIFTA. CIFTA has been approved in November of 1997 and corresponds to a first initiative, a global initiative of this nature. In fact, if we see a consideration of the convention, the party states are convinced against the manufacture and illegal traffic of firearms, munitions, explosives, and other related materials requires the international cooperation, exchange of information, and other measures, appropriate measures at the national, regional, and international levels. And so, since 1997, we have a very potent, very strong instrument at the regional level. CIFTA was ratified by 31 of the 34 member states of the OAS. It is a legally binding agreement that is destined to prevent, combat, and eradicate the manufacture and illegal traffic of APAL, these small arms and light weapons, munitions, and explosives. Today, it is the main tool of the OAS to address the topics and the control of firearms in the hemisphere. In its second order, Article 2, the Convention established 2 objectives. The first one is to prevent, combat, and eradicate the manufacture and illegal traffic of firearms, munitions, explosives, and other related materials. And here I would like to highlight this component, other related materials, which have to do with spare parts, components that can be attached to firearms. And the second objective related to the first, which is promotion and facilitation between the parties states of the cooperation and exchange of information and experiences to prevent, combat, and eradicate. In other words, we don't only want to prevent and eradicate all of these issues, the objectives, but also promote that there should be a better coordination between the member states in order to reach this objective. For this, the CIFTA, besides establishing in its first article of definitions firearms, explosive, and related components, in this way, it contributes with the harmonization of the convention among all of the instances of the region, establishes a series of provisions, and the first one is to the criminalization of traffic and associated behaviors, so that the states that haven't done so, I would also like to highlight here what we estimate or what is called associated behaviors that have to do with advice and issues related to the manufacture and illegal traffic. More than these provisions that criminalizes these two penal types, SIFTA has a series of articles that have to do with the control, the cycle of life of firearms and munitions, particularly the mandatory marking that has the objective to facilitate the identification of firearms and munitions and later tracking, and to favor the registry of information that has to do with the protection of that information, its maintenance for a reasonable period of time, particularly that can allow tracking in case of penal persecution or illegal firearms that are being trafficked, and exchange among the countries. A third component, which is rather important, has to do with physical security and the management of, of the of the arsenals, and also controls of the legal international market, where the member states have license for the importation, export, and transit of firearms within their territories, and it's directly related to a last component that makes a strengthening of the border control. And in fact, in this way, the provisions of SIFTA make a highlight on regional cooperation and exchange of experiences in four large moments of its life cycle, and to see the needs of intervention, whether it's in the prevention, detection, investigation, and penal prosecution of illegally practiced firearms. We still have challenges that we need to reach. We can observe today weaknesses in the laws and the national regulatory framework of many of the nations. And here I would like to call your attention to the framework that goes further than legislative framework and regulatory framework of the guidelines and infralegal issues. And with this, we have the easy access to firearms becomes a risk factor to promote armed violence and social exclusion, inequality, and the lack of public policies on protection. Another challenge is related to the porousness of the borders and the lack of efficient communication and cooperation tools. A third challenge is related to the deficiencies in the management of arsenals and judicial depots, which allows the deviation of the diversion of firearms and promote corruption, theft. And the police investigations, we still have a lack of investigation on the crime of traffic crime that allows to identify routes and points of vulnerability. We also see difficulties for tracking the firearms. With all of this, we have knowledge gaps that allows us to identify the diversion of groups and terminal groups, and to understand the different missions or the impact of firearms and in the communities. And the whole of all of these channels have vulnerabilities exploited by organized groups. It also feeds into the illegal market of firearms. There's other provisions included in the SIFTA legislation. We have model legislation that allows to incorporate the key obligations of SIFTA and promote its implementation by the national legislation. There are 7 model laws that include the crime tipification and the marking and tracking of firearms, a confiscation and a seizure of firearms, the surveilled delivery of firearms, strengthening of controls and the export points, maintaining confidentiality and exchange of information, and security measures to eliminate losses or deviations or diversions. More than the models, we have guides and manuals that are destined to the technical teams of the corresponding national institutions to guide its work and facilitate the information. I would like to call your attention to the last one, which are the marking standards, and to tell you that for 2024, other two new standards are available, which have to do with the operational procedures for the destruction of firearms and operational procedures for physical security and management of arsenals. I invite you to access uh, the QR code on the slide. Now, talking about the assistance of firearm and munitions, PACAM, I would like to tell you in 2010, and the objective was to strengthen the capacity of the national authorities of the region through the technical assistance of the countries who so wish it, facilitating practical tools for marking, destruction of firearms, munitions, and other related. In this first moment, between the markings of 2010 2016, there have been five topics: training of the national personnel, the elimination of abandoned munitions and remains of war, the marking and registration of firearms, management, transportation, and destruction of munitions and explosive materials and of its firearms.
At that moment, the results that were possible to reach were the donation of 39 machines for marking, the destruction of more than 46,000 weapons, training 867 people in the different institutions in the different countries in the region, and the destruction of more than 1.5 million of tons of ammunition. Currently, the PACAM program entered a different phase that counts with the funding of the European Union since 2000. Included the first phase of execution in 2022, and right now we are in phase 2 from 2022 to 2025. And I would like to highlight here that there was a component that we wanted to visibilize in the title of the program, which is counter-arresting the illicit proliferation, traffic of small weapons, but also there is the visibility of impact in the communities of Latin America and the Caribbean. The program has 5 objectives. The first one has to do with strengthening the framework, the national framework of regulation of firearms. And again, I want to highlight that in the regulatory framework includes laws, but is not limited to guidelines and operational and technical guidelines. The second component that we're going to look at in detail is with regards to the improvement of operational capacity for marking, safekeeping, and destruction of firearms and explosives and ammunitions, and then optimizing the control through the use of technologies of information. And then the fourth has to do with the logic of prevention. So it looks to strengthen the resilience of the community towards armed violence and reducing the access to arms, and especially thinking about the youth and the most vulnerable population of the communities. And the fifth component of which Steve Greener already talked about in his introduction is the development of a route of firearms in Latin America. And thereby we would coordinate within the countries of the region a roadmap. And therefore the they might identify the common challenges in order to establish in 8 or 10 years action plan that can be approved jointly. Then PACAM is a wholesome program that has been implemented by the Public Security Program of the OAS, which reduces the armed violence and also is promoting the reduction of armed violence and the obligation and the implementation of the obligations of SIFTA. 28 countries have been benefited in different capabilities. We have components also linked to the course of action of SIFTA from 2018 to 2024, which includes legislative assistance, technical and material support to manage the life cycle of weapons and ammunition, also the development and implementation of technology in order to promote the regional coordination, also the roadmap that we just talked about, and the prevention of armed violence. Again, I invite you to scan the QR code so that you can look at a very short video that talks about the results that we reached in the first phase of the project with the funding of the European Union. In terms of legal assistance, what is it about? It's about providing assistance to the countries that require it in terms of adequating or adapting the national regulation. So far, we have been able to provide assistance for 6 countries: Costa Rica, El Salvador, Jamaica, Peru, Ecuador, and Panama. Now, talking in detail about the life cycle of firearms and ammunition, we have 3 big aspects: the physical security and the management of arsenals, the destruction of firearms and ammunition, and also the marking and tracking of firearms. The first topic that has to do with physical security and managing arsenals, we need to know that this includes processes related to the accounting and storage and transportation, and also the manipulation of all of the inventory that are protected and are safe kept of firearms, ammunition, and explosives. This is, you can look at this in the Mosaic Compendium. It has a set of policy regulations that were assembled by the European Union. And with this component of physical security and management of arsenals, we are looking to strengthen the institutional capacities of the states for better control. A better control that allows to avoid accidental explosions in deposits of ammunition, also to facilitate the identification and elimination of excessive arms, and also to detect losses. As of today, this component of arsenal management, we have worked in 11 countries. We have trained more than 136 people, and 15 storage warehouses have been improved. We have also performed workshops with regards to good practices. This topic of management of arsenals with regards to the identification and classification of small weapons and light weapons. 18 countries have been benefited with more than 120 participants, and we've made 2 workshops. And in brief, we will do a 3rd workshop. Still, with regards to physical security and arsenal management, the OAS has made available for the members who wish to access this system of information of inventory of arms and ammunition in order to facilitate and in order for them to have a technical assistance for managing their inventories. So far, 9 countries have expressed their interest, and more than 15 institutions are being used are using this system of the OAS.
Ahora hablando del componente de destrucción de
Now
armas y
we need to talk about the component of destruction of arms and
municiones.
ammunition.
Este componente tiene por
This
objetivo eliminar
component,
los
the
riesgos
objective is to eliminate the
asociados a los
risk
excedentes de
associated
armas y
to
municiones,
the
que incluyen las
accidents
transferencias, la
of
acumulación
firearms,
de
which
municiones
includes the transfers
inestables
and
y el propio
accumulation of
riesgo de que
unstable
sean objeto de
ammunitions and the
robo o
risk
sabotaje.
that they are robbed or
En este componente,
sabotaged.
la OEA viene
So with this
trabajando en la
component, the OAS
capacitación
has been
de
working,
los equipos
training
técnicos,
the
tanto en
technical
términos de
teams,
destrucción o en programas voluntarios de entrega de
topics
armas,
such as
de
destruction
identificación
or
de armas y municiones,
identification of
curso de
arms and
EOD3,
ammunitions, and
sino
also
también
a
trabaja
course
con
of
asistencia
EOD3, and
técnica,
also
material,
we are providing
logística,
technical
y
assistance,
aquí hago
material,
hincapié
technical,
en el hecho de que
logistics,
la OEA
and
también puede
also the
certificar
OAS
los
might
procesos y
certify
capacitaciones para la
processes
destrucción de
and the
armas y
trainings
municiones.
for weapon destruction and ammunition
La
destruction.
OEA trabaja con
The OAS
diferentes técnicas
is
para
working
la
with different
destrucción de
techniques for
armas
the
y
destruction
municiones
of
pequeñas y
firearms,
ligeras, y de la misma
small
manera
and light
con
firearms,
diferentes métodos de destrucción
with
también para
different
municiones
destruction
que
methods for
dependerán de
ammunitions
las
depending on the
condiciones y
conditions,
las características de las municiones y de las
characteristics of the
armas
ammunition.
que correspondan. Hasta el momento,
So
7
far,
países
7
han sido
countries have been
beneficiados por
benefited
dicha asistencia técnica, con
by this
casi
technical
100,000
assistance,
personas capacitadas,
and
más de
609 people have
82,000
been trained,
armas destruidas
82,000
y más de
weapons, more than 82,000
3.600.000
weapons have been
municiones
destroyed, and more
destruidas.
than 3 million ammunitions have been destroyed.
Por último, en el componente de destrucción de armas y
Lastly, in the
municiones,
component of
hay
destruction
que
of
mencionar el
arms
curso
and
de
ammunition,
desactivación de
we have to
artefactos
mention the
explosivos
course of
a
deactivation
nivel
of
de
explosive
EOD3,
artifacts,
que se destina a capacitar
EOD3
técnicos
level,
de los Estados miembros
in order to
y
train
cuenta con el apoyo
technical
del Ministerio
officers
de
from the
Defensa de
member
España.
states with the
14
support of the
países
Ministry
se
of
han
Defense from
beneficiado
Spain. We
con
have
más de
benefited 14 countries,
69
and more than
graduandos.
69 people have graduated from this course.
Ahora bien, para hablar del marcaje y el rastreo,
Now, talking
hay que
about
saber que
marking
el
and
marcaje es
tracing.
la técnica que se
Marking
utiliza
is the
para
technique that is
disponer
being
marcas, que
used
pueden ser
to put
códigos o
marks,
números de
be
serie,
it
en las
codes
partes
or serial
fundamentales
numbers,
de las
in
armas,
the basic
que
parts
tienen
of
que
the
ser
firearms,
legibles y
and they need to be
difíciles de
legible and
alterar o de
difficult
borrar
to alter
para
or
que
erase,
cumpla con el
so that
objetivo de que las
the
armas queden
arms are
identificadas
well
y puedan
identified
ser rastreadas.
and may be tracked.
En este componente, la
So
OEA,
within
a
this
través de PACAM,
component, the
viene
OAS through
brindando
PACAM
capacitación
has been
específica
providing
sobre marcaje de
training
armas de fuego,
with
marco
regards to
legal,
marking,
estándares de la
legal
OEA
framework
y sobre el
standards from the
uso de
OAS, and
armas
the use
donadas,
of
incluso
arms that are
viene
donated,
donando armas en términos de
and
asistencia a
also
los países que
it
así
has
lo
donated
requieren.
firearms in terms of depending
Hasta
on
el
the needs
momento,
of the country
18 países
that
se han
requires it.
beneficiado,
18 countries have been
479
benefited,
personas han
479
sido
people have been
capacitadas,
trained,
16
16
máquinas ya fueron
machines
donadas y
have been
todavía
donated,
queda una por
and we still
entregar.
have one to be delivered.
Por último, me gustaría
And
hablarles
then
del
lastly,
componente
I
de
would
la
like
entrega
to
voluntaria de armas
speak
y
about the
decirles que
volunteer
PACAM
delivery of
busca
firearms.
capacitar al
PACAM
personal
is looking to
nacional de las
train the
instituciones
national
que correspondan
personnel of the
que
institutions
así lo soliciten sobre buenas prácticas en la
on the good
recolección de armas
practices in collecting
ilícitas y
firearms,
también
illegal
las que
firearms,
ya no sean
and also the
deseables.
firearms that are
16 países han sido
not
objeto
necessary anymore.
de dichas
6 countries have
entregas
been
y más de 300
have
funcionarios han sido
delivered,
capacitados.
and
Con eso,
351
les
officers have
agradezco
been
mucho
trained.
por su atención.
Thank you for your attention.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias, estimada señora Yanaina Camelo. Queremos expresar nuestro
Thank
más
you,
sincero
dear
agradecimiento
Janaina
por la
Camelo. We
maravillosa
want to
presentación
express
intitulada
your
La cooperación
gratitude for your
regional en la
wonderful
gestión del ciclo de
presentation
vida de las armas y
entitled
municiones
the
y el programa de
International
asistencia para el control de
Cooperation
armas y
in
municiones.
Control of
Este es
Firearms
un
and
tema fundamental
Ammunition.
para nuestro
This
futuro
is
común
a basic
y
topic for
resulta
our
inspirador ver
future,
cómo a
and
través
it's
de la cooperación
inspiring to
regional
see how through
podemos
regional
garantizar una gestión
cooperation we can
responsable de las
guarantee
armas
a
que
responsible
contribuye a
management
la
of
paz y
the
seguridad de
firearms
nuestras
that
naciones.
contributes to the peace,
Aplaudimos el
security of our
entusiasmo y
nations. We
compromiso
applaud the
con los que se
enthusiasm
impulsa
and
este programa
commitment
y
that
estamos
it
convencidos de que
drive
juntos
this program,
lograremos avances
and we are
significativos en
convinced
este
that
ámbito
together
tan
we
crucial.
may progress
Gracias por
significantly in
compartir esta
this
visión tan
very
necesaria y
important topic.
motivadora
Thank you
y
for sharing
continuaremos con la sesión de
vision.
preguntas y
We will
respuestas
continue
después de
with
las siguientes
the
dos
section of
exposiciones.
questions and
Nuevamente,
answers
muchas
after
gracias.
the following presentations. Thank you again.
A continuación, Pasaremos al panel número 2.
Next, we will move on to panel number 2. Mr.
Mr.
Walter Murcia will be in charge and is joining us from the Regional Center for Peace and Development for Latin America and the Caribbean. And the topic is counteracting the new trends for manufacturing of firearms and ammunitions. He has a master in international studies, specialized in politics and security by the University Torquato Di Tella. Professional experience is focused in management and implementation of projects of cooperation for development and public policies with an emphasis in strategic topics. He has been a consultant and a researcher in topics related to citizen security and development for cooperation and the private sector. He has been working for the Institute for 2017, and he has contributed with different projects and initiatives in order to strengthen the capabilities of the states of Latin America and the Caribbean in the topic of weapon control and the combating and prevention of trafficking of firearms and ammunitions. Mr. Walter, you have the floor. Can you hear us?
Le cedemos el uso de la plataforma para que pueda usted proyectar su
You
presentación.
may use the platform for your presentation. Thank you, everyone. Good morning to all. I am glad to represent UNLIREC in this very important activity to deepen on these topics that are affecting our region. In this sense, I also want to thank the organizers, the Department of Public Security of the OAS, and also the IADB for this invitation to participate in this event. So I'm going to share my screen, and please confirm if you can see the presentation.
Lo escuchamos fuerte y claro y lo estamos viendo, así es.
We hear you loud and clear, and we're looking at it. Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Bien, ante todo,
Good.
no
First of
quisiera ser
all,
repetitivo con lo
I don't
que
want
ya
to
han
repeat
mencionado en
what
las palabras
the others
introductorias
have
con el
already
contexto
mentioned in the
al
introductions with
complejo
regards to the
escenario, ¿no? en el
very
que nos
complex
encontramos como
scenario that
región
we are
y
in
el
as a
peso
region
preponderante que tienen
and the
las
weight
armas en las
that
espirales de
the
violencia
firearms have in
características a
the
nuestra
violence
región.
spirals that are
Como
a
sabemos,
characteristic
escenarios
of
en
our
Latinoamérica
region.
Latina
It's not a
y el
secret that Latin
Caribe
America
han
and the
sido consideradas en
Caribbean
las últimas
have been
décadas como
considered
una de
in the
las
last decades
regiones
as one
con
of
las
the
más
regions
altas
with
tasas de
the
homicidios en el
the
mundo.
highest rates of
Como
homicide in the
el
world,
8% de la
with
población
8% of the
en
population
2021
in
en esta
2021.
en esta región se
In
concentraron
this
alrededor del
region,
29% de los
around
homicidios que se cometieron
29%
a
of the
nivel global.
homicides at a
Y como lo
global level
mencionaban en
were
las palabras
concentrated in this region.
introductorias,
So,
pues
as mentioned in the
la gran
introduction,
mayoría de los homicidios se están
most of
cometiendo
the
con armas de
homicides
fuego.
are being
Ustedes
committed
pueden
with
ver en pantalla
firearms, and you can see on the
porcentajes,
screen
¿no?
the percentages
de los homicidios que son
of the
cometidos
homicides that have
con
been
armas de
committed
fuego.
with
Como podemos
firearms, and we can see
indudablemente, pues,
here
una gran proporción.
that
El otro
this is a
punto
big
importante
percentage.
también que
Another
habría que
important point
señalar es
that we
que
need to
las armas
highlight
no solo
is that
están
the
presentes
firearms are not only
en la mayor
present
parte de los
in
homicidios
most
que
of the
ocurren en la región,
homicides
sino también
that are being
aparecen
committed in the
en
region,
otras
but they
expresiones de
also come
violencia, como la
out in
violencia
other expressions
psicológica,
of violence,
sexual,
such as
doméstica y social,
psychological,
así
sexual,
como
domestic,
también
and
acompañan
social. So,
otras economías
and other
ilícitas.
also as in other
Dichos
illicit
datos
economies.
y los contextos adversos, ¿no?
This
que ocurren en
information
algunos
and the
países de la
adverse
región nos
contexts
muestran
in some of the
la
countries of the
preponderancia que
region
tienen las armas
show
en las espirales
the
de violencia que
prevalence of
afectan a
firearms
nuestros países.
in these violence
A medida
spirals that
también que
affect
la
our
presencia y el
countries.
accionar
Also,
del
the
crimen
presence and
organizado,
acting
de
of the
pandillas, de grupos
criminal
delincuenciales en
groups,
general, se ha
gangs, and
profundizado en las
other
sociedades.
groups
Los contextos de
is
seguridad
prevalent in
se han vuelto
society, and
cada vez más complejos y desafiantes para
we
los
have
estados.
ever more challenging contexts for
Pero
the
bien,
states.
sin duda,
With this presentation, what I would like to share with you is a characterization of the dynamics, the trends of how the weapons become illegal, go from legal to illegal. And there's two very important phenomena that we need to understand in order to understand the illicit flow of weapons. So in general, in our region, these illicit flows characterized by being complex and multi-directional phenomena that responds to different national contexts and sub-regional contexts. And the weapons are being distributed to different destinations, final destinations or transit destinations. And even we have found some warehouses in some countries, but in general, in the region, the illicit flows are being nurtured or can be identified, particularly in the national context. They may be robbed or they may be lost, and this has been reflected in the last year. There have been, we have identified several firearms that have been lost from the arsenals of the state, from the military or from police, and these losses are due to lack of security, poor management or negligence from the personnel in charge. And also the civil users of weapons have been targeted for this losses of weapons, this diversion of weapons. And this has been also the criminal groups have been feeding this illegal market. These claims of losses and diversion of weapons have been increasing. The dynamic of illicit trafficking of weapons is also characterized by different movements of different countries, same sub-region. We've also recorded cases of weapons that are legally imported, but then afterwards they are trafficked to criminal groups for neighboring countries by using different techniques and other modus operandi. And there's also a boomerang effect where the weapons and ammunitions that are being exported from one country to the other, they return to the first importer illegally. And this ammunition, this trafficking is being fed by the transnational and global trafficking from other regions, particularly from the United States, which is the main origin of the firearms and ammunitions that are trafficked in our region. And from the request of tracing by the Central American countries in the last of the years, more than half of the weapons that have been recovered in Central America or in crime scenes are from the United States. The weapons from Europe are also common. And as a result of the Eureka operation by Interpol, we discovered that there was an international network from Slovenia, Spain, Romania, Brazil, Panama, different countries. So with these main characteristics, I also want to highlight the different sources of which this diversion and trafficking is being nurtured in a region. So particularly the weapons are coming in illegally through different modalities of transportation. Terrestrial means are used. They may be transported through vehicles and people. And the terrestrial means, which is most common, is the trafficking at a small scale. And this modality is characterized by a very small flow of arms, but this also responds to an organized strategy and a demand scheme. But then also weapons may be transported through the ocean, through different containers or using small boats that are not monitored for short trips. And the other one is the aerial means through commercial flights, private jets, and in the last years of the region, we have collected many weapons and ammunitions that were transported by air in private jets that are linked to drug trafficking. So this is a very complex phenomena. It is a changing phenomena, and different modes of transportation are being used. And this is very important to highlight also that since the authorities are improving and are improving their development for this combating of trafficking, of crime also, and of the organizations, these organizations are now looking for new routes in order to perpetrate their crimes and illicit trafficking. So there may be also a combination of different modalities of transportation that may be used. So these are the routes that we have mapped in Central America that connect with the countries of the Caribbean, and also terrestrial routes may be used in combination with maritime routes. Also in the region, it is possible to find, in the last few years, we have identified all the routes that are used that are on very difficult places to access, and they have warehouses there, and they deposit the weapons there temporarily, and afterwards this is like a transit warehouse, and afterwards they can continue to their final destination. It is important also to mention that for weapons trafficking, they are using different techniques to make the firearms enter the illegal circuits, falsifying official documents and licenses, also importing documents, the certificates of final users, customs documents that are being falsified. Also, there's weaknesses in the institutions, there's deficiencies in the national systems of control of transference, also leaks in the borders, gaps in the borders, deficient infrastructure at the borders, and corruption, among others. Part of the characteristics of the trends that this phenomenon has in the region, we can highlight also that in the last years we have identified the trafficking of firearms or components that is being done, and they are being sent through postal services and using the public postal service or private service, and the weapons are camouflaged as other products or other goods, and they are being trafficked, taking advantage of the high volumes of packages that are received in the customs and in the postal offices. And so the weapons are being sent unassembled. So these are some cases that we have recorded in the last years. This doesn't mean that this only happens in these countries. This has been a modality that is being used in different countries of the region. The weapons are being camouflaged or in different products, as in shoes or in electronic devices. And as you can see in the screen, this is a case that was recorded in 2018 in Colombia, and we found parts and components of weapons that were hidden in packages as boxes of different types of electronic devices, as you can see on the screen. So these are parts of rifles that were hidden in these shaving machines. Also, we have on the methods that are being used by these criminal networks and structures may be infinite. We have seen on the reports on the last years, we have seen the creativity that they are using. These individuals are using for their illicit purposes. And as you can see on the screen at the end of 2018, the Interpol issued a purple alert of this modus operandi that was being used. So these are toy weapons, and they were adapted so that they would look like they were harmless with 3D printers. So you can see there that you can build the rest of the structure of the weapon plastic in order to simulate that it was a toy. And it might take us all morning citing cases of this collection of weapons, and also to identify the types of modus operandi and strategies that they are using. But we can also have like a close-up just so that you take into account the type of weapons, the type of accessories, and the types of methods that are being used by these criminal structures. For example, here we have an important case in 2017 that was detected in this airport in Brazil. 60 rifles that were hidden in a container inside the heaters for pools from the United States. And we can continue providing more examples, and that's not the point for this presentation, but we wanted to present some examples of the different methods that are being used to hide the weapons by these networks of illegal weapons trafficking. So also we can see here that this is a very well-used practice in the countries of the region. We can see here that the hiding methods could be complex and very sophisticated, or also it can be very simple. Another important point is the link between trafficking and illicit manufacturing. We know that the artisanal manufacturing of weapons has been done for a long time. These type of weapons have a specific name in El Salvador, in countries in Central America and Mexico. They are known as artisanal weapons. And these are weapons that are manufactured with rudimentary materials, tubes, metallic, also with different components of other weapons that are no longer used. And in the last years, what we can observe is that with the advances of technology, the new methods for designing weapons, and the adapting capabilities for these criminal networks, there have been new trends for manufacturing these illicit weapons, which suppose a very big challenge for the states. So this 3D printing has also been used also by artisanal producers, and this is also known as additive manufacturing, which is a geometric representation that creates physical objects, and by using, in this case, filaments of polymer. And they are used in design programs, and the first projects to develop this type of technology are being created through programs of design programs, and go back to the 1980. But then in 2010, these 3D printers have been widely available, and although the sophistication and also the expiring of different patents has decreased the costs, the production costs, and so this is widely available in the market. The prices of these equipment go from $600 to $6,000. It depends on the country where it's made and if the printer is already assembled or is disassembled. The polymers, it is also important to mention that this is not the only material that is being used to manufacture weapons, but they may also use metal. Then, on the one hand, with regards to illicit manufacturing, I would also like to mention
I would like to mention some historical background so to see what is the evolution of these type of firearms, as of the possibility of printing 3D issues and using this additive technology. In 2012, Cody Wilson, U.S. company, it informed that it would announce that the model created by them, Wilson, a year later, was trying the Liberator .380 is made by 16 parts, 15 of them can be used. They say that despite using a steel nail, it's made from polymers from the beginning. The plans for the Liberator 380, even though the United States requested Cody Wilson to take away the blueprints for the manufacture of the Liberator, they still have it as of the files of a CAD. They have these 3D printers and can make any models. There are different types of files that can be used by the software in many sites. These files are shared that are guides for printing and they're all found in the open web, and they have them in different form of a deep web or dark web. And it's important to mention that this Liberator gun was only the beginning for those or for the different users to start developing different types of firearms in printed in 3D, more and more sophisticated. I have some examples of the evolvement of the manufacturing of different types of firearms. And as the blueprints proliferate in the networks, they're not only more diverse but more sophisticated in regards to its functional. On your left, you can see the Washbear revolver. In the center, on the right, the lock pistol, and you can see a pistol carabina FGC-9 as known in these different areas. On the other hand, it's also important that this has also come to nurture the proliferation of phantom firearms, which are firearms that are self-assembled, that have no serial number, and they are not trackable. They are sold in kits ready to assemble and different to the firearms that are manufactured under traditional and industrial processes where you can track the serial numbers and everything, and the brand, the manufacturer, the country of manufacture, and the caliber. These firearms do not have all these information. Another important point to mention is that the region has not been exempt of this type of trend. As we can see, a few days ago, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, they registered the sale of a person where they were in the final phase of the manufacture of the PF. And so the police from Brazil and the national police from the United States arrested this man. As you can see on the screen, this man had the different equipment. You can see the 3D printer that was being used for this manufacturing process, and also some munitions were seized. Also in Panama this year, the national police ensemble dismantled the clandestine workshop for the assembly of firearms, which puts into evidence that this is a phenomenon that is present with its different variants. And the region, at the issue of conversion, the region hasn't been left behind on this new trend. The conversion implies to modify the nature and use for which certain provisions from different areas or different types of revolvers were being made. And in some countries of the region, the authorities have discovered clandestine workshop dedicated to this type of modifications and amendments. On the other hand, it's also important to mention other characteristics that the illegal traffic of firearms is having. And in the last few years, the firearms traffickers are adapting to technological events that progress and the communications, and they're making use of the internet, the surface, and the dark web, profound internet, and they're also using Telegram and WhatsApp and other forums. On the other hand, how anonymous it is of the dark web has facilitated the market. It's so easy to find legal and illegal firearms, and also blueprints on how to manufacture the firearms. On the other hand, and of course, just as important, we have to point out the intrinsic link that exists in firearms traffic and the criminals. We heard that there is a link with other expressions of organized crime, and there's other issues that protect the business and on drug traffic, general contraband, mining, and illegal felling, the money laundering and asset laundering, and migrant trafficking. As mentioned in other presentations, we have to pay attention to the complexity of the phenomena and the links that could exist with other economies, illegal economies. It's also important to mention that illegal traffic and munitions trafficking growing as the drug traffic is starting to become consolidated and strengthen control in different countries. The earnings of this business has allowed that the criminals have increased and have protected their markets as is registered in Mexico. The cartels have been dealing with different types of firearms, as we can see on the screen. This is not only small firearms such as pistols or revolvers, but we're talking about long firearms, and we're talking about the use of Barrett caliber 50, which are capable of going through different types of shielding, and these have been identified not only in countries like Mexico, but also in South America. And on the screen, we can see this type of firearms and armament that has been identified by criminal groups that operate in the borders between Brazil and Paraguay. And also in August of this year, the Salvadorian authorities mentioned an important seizure of drugs that were being trafficked by maritime, and they have identified also firearms, AK-47 and carabines and M60 and sharpshooter Barrett 50 that we saw in the previous slide. Without a doubt, the link with drug traffic promotes and feeds the demand of illegal firearms. And we have also seen the link between firearms and drug traffic, particularly that the firearms are not only for accompanying purposes or to protect the cargo, and they're being used also as exchange currency, and these have been identified in different important seizures that have been made in different countries of the region. And on the other hand, we have also identified collection points. With these type of structures, we serve as temporary warehouses for them to be moved later on to other countries. Another link that has not been seen too much in depth is money and asset laundering. Despite that, in the last few years, the use of assets and virtual currency, particularly cryptocurrencies, has become an advantage to make payments with a greater degree of anonymity in strictly regulated environments, and particularly in the dark web and the deep web, they make use of this cryptocurrency. It's important, therefore, to address and give follow-up to the financial system of the criminal organization. As they say, follow the money, corporate networks, and they have properties and furnitures to carry out illegal trafficking of different sorts of products. We can also talk about the link with other types of crime. Illegal firearms have come to promote crimes such as extortion. There's a link between arms trafficking and illegal mining. A study in 2023 noted the presence of one or more groups in nearly 70% of the municipalities of the bordering zones of the 8 countries that make up the Amazon basin. I do not want to delay this, but it's also important to it's important to mention that the identify of organized crime and drug trafficking, human trafficking, and allows these criminal organizations to make or have arms that are more modern and greater to close. And this has been talked about in the previous presentation, but I would like to put this into consideration. Regulatory and legal framework gaps that do not respond to the dynamic that changes with the traffic of arms and its modus operandi, and somehow repercusses has a repercussion at any type of effort to face comprehensively these type of scourge. It's also important to count with in those countries where it exists or strengthen the specialized units in illegal firearms traffic at the level of the police and the prosecutors, as well as personnel and necessary resource to face this scourge. Also, greater interinstitutional coordination to address a comprehensive way of the cycle of life of these firearms and munitions. The need of data and generation of proof and evidence is a pending issue in the region. In fact, we do not count with a lot of information to understand the phenomena, to understand its true magnitude and impact. Therefore, we consider that it's absolutely important that these type of activities, training activities, come to fill a space or a gap or a vacuum that is present in the region, and therefore go in depth into this type of phenomena. And so it's key and strategic to go into this and then strengthen the measures of control and firearms and munitions management, as well as the systems of the control for international transfer to avoid existing risk of deviation and triangulation. And to close, they would say to carry out the greater efforts to determine if the seized firearms that the authorities registered were the object of traffic before they were seized, go further than the seizure. Some countries report a series of firearms that have been seized, but it's important to examine in depth the context or the criminal context of the seizure to generate other lines of investigation, such as tracking, both national or local and international. And of course, as Anaina was mentioned, the importance of promoting international cooperation and coordination through roadmaps that are currently being developed in countries in our region. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Walter Murcia. We appreciate you sincerely for the presentation, counteracting different trends for the traffic and illegal manufacture of firearms, munitions, and explosives. The relevance of this topic could not be more evident in the current context where the adaptability and innovating solutions are key to face these emerging challenges. The presentation not only showed different perspectives to counteract these threats, but also promoted a profound idea in our attendance. And you delivered the information with the interesting message, asking all to collaborate actively against those new trends. Once again, thank you very much, and we will continue with the question and answer period at the end of the third panel. Next is comes from the the program of the conventional arms and munitions and the program of security and technology for this number 3 channel. She's an investigator in conventional firearms and munitions and the program of security and technology. Her specialization areas include international security against terrorism, emerging technology, and impact and defense and security. Besides the methodology of perspective, such as scanning the horizon, series game, and future scenarios, as a master's in a degree in Arab World Studies and um, a degree in international relations at Sussex University. Before joining UNIDIR, was senior analyst in RAND Europe, where she carried out investigation, defense, and security to promote the formulation of policies in the public sector and third sector. She has co-authored diverse reports, both public and confidential, such as topics related with defense and security. Ms. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will just share my screen. Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes, we are seeing it and we listen to you. The authority is yours. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. And thank you very much to the OAS for inviting me to take part in this event. So today I look forward to speaking about technologies as a tool to counter the diversion of small arms and light weapons. So the potential beneficial uses of technologies to counter diversion. The content that I will be sharing is based on a joint research endeavor between UNIDIR and the Flemish Peace Institute, which we have undertaken since 2022. First, though, I want to touch upon why there may be interest and benefit to examining the use of technology. As you're very well aware, and as the previous presentations have also highlighted, a number of initiatives and measures have already been developed at the national, regional, and international levels to counter the diversion of conventional weapons more widely and small arms and light weapons specifically. These are primarily non-technological in nature, and while helpful, we are still faced with the issue of diversion. So the question now becomes whether and how can technology help complement such initiatives? There have already been discussions and even use of technologies, yet there remains a gap between the increased attention and interest in technology and the understanding and use of it for counter-diversion purposes. Therefore, through this project, this research initiative, we wanted to raise awareness and increase the knowledge base on this issue, and also to try to better understand why this gap between of interest and implementation exists. Technologies writ large could be beneficial, efficient, and effective in supporting and strengthening existing measures aimed at preventing, negating, or mitigating diversion risks. For example, there are a number of existing technologies used in the commercial and industrial sectors to ensure the security of legitimate trade flows, and from which we could draw out lessons learned and identify potential relevant technologies to transfer to our sector. And here, when I talk about technology, it is in a very broad sense in terms of technical processes, methods, or knowledge used to accomplish a task. At the outset of this presentation, however, I do want to note that technology is not the panacea, meaning that it cannot on its own fix the current and future challenges regarding illicit trade in small arms and light weapons, and can become an issue in and of itself if poorly applied. So what I'm really encouraging is taking a technology realistic point of view. So not just looking at what technologies exist and what they can do, but examining the purpose and the context of application. In essence, recognizing that technologies do not exist in a vacuum. Before starting to talk about technologies, however, I want to present to you a framework that we developed and which can be used to help think through some of these issues. Specifically, this is a 3-step framework for the implementation of technology for counter-diversion of conventional weapons. It has 3 steps. The first step focuses on understanding the risks of diversion, which are tailored to different types of conventional weapons, different types of small arms and light weapons, and the context in which we are operating in. A technology-centric approach may omit addressing the specific needs and context of implementation. Therefore, that is why we suggest as a first step not to select a technology, but rather to understand why we want to adopt a technology and for what reasons. In other words, what is the issue that needs addressing? What is the main form that diversion takes for the specific item that we are looking at enhancing counter-diversion initiatives? Once that there is an understanding of what the needs and the gaps are, then we can turn to examining what technologies, if any, can help address the issues that have emerged in the first step. So therefore, in the second step, we can identify the potential existing technologies that could help or prevent or overcome the identified risk or risks from the first step. I'll talk about the different technologies that can exist and could be applied extensively in the rest of the presentation. So I'll come to that in a bit. And finally, the third and final step assesses the identified technologies according to the context in which they are to be applied, and also against the selected attributes that a technology should ideally possess. So this encompasses understanding the landscape of application. So does the technology comply with the various arms control instruments and their requirements? But also, does the selected technology possess aspects or attributes which are important to the user? For example, is a technology sufficiently robust, and can they endure very low, very high temperatures? So thinking really in terms of the contextual issues. So overall, this three-step framework highlights that the implementation of technology should be needs-driven and context-sensitive. And as such, while I will present and map technologies in the following slides, I do want to indicate that this mapping is indicative, and any considerations regarding technology should take this framework into account. Within our research, we identified a range of technologies which could have different types of purposes. And these technologies range from being more to less complex. So you see on the screen, there is a chart, a map, and it's not exhaustive. We have 14 technologies on there, but obviously many more exist. But the particularity of why we selected these technologies and why we examined these technologies is that either they have seen some use in the area of counter-diversion of weapons, or they have been employed in the civilian commercial realm. So in other words, they are known technologies from which we can draw existing lessons learned. As you can see also as well from the screen, these technologies can fulfill different purposes, such as enabling tracking and tracing, item level identification, anti-tampering, data analysis, and more. These are the technologies which were assessed in our research by experts. These were experts with knowledge on issues to do with arms control, international trade flows, and counter-diversion. And through our engagement with these experts, we try to kind of paint a picture, try to understand whether and to what extent these different technologies could have an impact on counter-diversion efforts of small arms and light weapons, as well as what potential barriers could exist to the successful implementation of these technologies. I'll also touch upon some of these technologies in a bit more detail to explain them a bit more to you, as I'm aware that maybe you're not as familiar with them. Unfortunately, I won't have the time to go through all 14, so I just chose a few to go through. First, I want to just touch upon chemical encoding. Chemical encoding is the use of individual combinations of chemical particles to mark a product and identify it with unique markings. These marks, unlike something that is laser engraved, for example, a 2D code, are not visible to the naked eye, and they will be seen using ultraviolet detection instead. And to identify these marks, because they're not visible, they do also require specific proprietary laboratory tests to kind of identify and decode the related data. Chemical encoding is already used in various sectors, notably when we're looking in conventional weapons. There is a pilot method using chemical encoding, a type of chemical encoding to mark ammunition. And chemical encoding, as you can see on the screen, is particularly well suited to identify items. So throughout their life cycle, it can be used from manufacture to destruction. And post-diversion, it can be used to trace items back to the last legal custodian or storage facility. The second technology I will touch upon is radio frequency identification, or RFID. RFID technology consists of three main items: a chip. So, yep, just a chip like what you have in computers. An antenna, which is usually attached to the chip, and an external reader. So data is encoded in the chip, transmitted via the antenna, and read by the reader. RFID tags come in a wide range of types. They can be passive or active. There's many different types, but essentially I won't go into the detail of that. But essentially, they can be applied at different stages of the life cycle. They can be applied at different levels, whether it's the packaging, for example. They can be applied also, they're very versatile, and depending on whether they're passive or active, they can have a range of uses. And most notably, they can support tracking, marking, record keeping, and more. So they have this versatility, as you can see as well, illustrated on the figure. Then we have distributed ledger technology, or DLT. You may be familiar with a type of DLT, which is blockchain, which is commonly has been, technology used in the financial sector. But essentially, DLT is a ledger in which transactions are stored, and this uses cryptographic techniques to store this data in permanent and unchangeable ways. And really, it's a way of enhancing transparency within a system. Data that is held on a DLT is very hard to manipulate, and the aim is therefore to enhance trust in this data. And this means that you can include data on weapons, related components, such as information on the manufacturer, manufacturing dates, end use, end user, etc. And this could be stored in the DLT throughout the lifetime of an item. So to that end, DLT is particularly well suited with the aim of export and import licensing and clearance, and to also detect areas of weaknesses within the life cycle. And finally, I'll just come to the last technology. We looked at AI technologies. AI is a set of technologies which help enable computers to perform a variety of advanced functions, such as the ability to kind of see or understand or translate spoken, written, or other types of data, make recommendations, and more. And we broke this down further by illustrating three AI-related capabilities. And here I'll focus specifically on big data analysis. Big data refers to extremely large data sets. And big data analysis usually means employing machine learning, which is a type of AI, in order to make sense of this data. Machine learning describes algorithms which allow machines to learn from data, eliminating the need for human instruction to perform certain tasks. This is particularly useful when you have a huge amount of data, which is too difficult for a human to go through. And there's also an element of prediction that can be applied as well, a prediction of outcomes. This is something which is used in financial flows. So for example, also data that is captured through sensors. Basically, it can really help with the identification of unusual patterns, or specific to our sector here, sanctions compliance, for example. So very useful, potentially very useful in the pre-export phase by giving support to human-led risk analysis and enabling the automated data analysis and assessment, as well as the identification of fraudulent documents, if we're going more into the computer vision aspect of things. Of course, we kind of
Por supuesto,
examined.
ya examinamos.
Sorry, I heard something come through, but I don't think it was meant for me. So essentially, we didn't just examine the technologies in and of itself. We also tried to examine impact and barriers for each of the technologies. But we try to break this down across different elements, or kind of break it down a bit further, because otherwise it's a bit too broad. So we specifically assess the relevance of technologies to help across different life cycle stages, so pre-export, transfer, and post-delivery, because we're aware that risk and methods of diversion differ between these. We also distinguished between 3 elements that comprise counter-diversion, so differentiating between the goals and the stage of an occurrence of an element, so prevention, detection, and identification. And this division, this kind of differentiation allowed us to examine whether certain technologies are better suited at different parts of the life cycle or different counter-diversion elements. We had a lot of findings, so I'll select some of the findings to share with you today. First thing is to note is that all 14 of the technologies which were assessed by the experts who took part in our research were found to have potential relevance in helping counter the diversion of small arms and light weapons. The benefits of the technologies were various, and participating experts notably highlighted the fact that technology can help improve knowledge of unknowns through better use of data. They can help overcome space and time constraints, such as the time-consuming and physical nature of post-shipment verification. However, I know this is a lot of information to absorb on what is on the slide, but really the main finding from this is that the types of technologies that participants identified as most relevant tended to differ depending on the life cycle stage, so whether they were pre-export, transfer, or post-delivery. In a similar vein, the relevance of technology in aiding a specific counter-diversion element, so prevention, detection, or identification, also differed. Most of the assessed technologies were in fact found to be better suited to detecting diversion while it is occurring or after it has occurred, rather than to preventing diversion. So in that sense, it shows a nice complementarity between this and non-technological measures to counter diversion. In terms of barriers to implementation of the technology, the participating experts all identified the technologies as facing barriers, though for the most part, these were deemed to be small to medium-sized barriers. Different types of barriers were defined, so it wasn't just homogeneous challenges, and specifically, experts perceived infrastructural and cost requirements to pose the highest barriers to the successful implementation of the technologies. On the other hand, ethical and social requirements were perceived as posing the lowest barriers to implementation. And this finding was consistent across all of the life cycle stages, meaning pre-export, transfer, and post-delivery. As you can see from the slide, we were able to map the technologies according to both their perceived impact on counter-diversion versus their overall score regarding barriers to implementation. As shown, the technologies fell in the upper 2 quadrants, where all were highlighted to be higher impact, but then you can see some differences in terms of the barriers faced. More specifically, technologies assessed as having a higher impact while facing lower barriers include document authentication. So for example, authenticating end-user certificate technologies, which can help with that. E-seals, electronic seals, notably used in transport, RFIDs, as discussed, these are very versatile, and to a lesser extent, 2D codes, so more of a marking technology, and NFC, which is very similar to RFID. However, and despite these scores, I should remind again that the choice of a specific technology should be based on context and need. So even though we show this mapping to show kind of the findings, we don't recommend specific technologies or combination thereof to help counter diversion. Again, this choice should be context specific. And indeed, while I have discussed at length the quantitative findings, I also want to raise the fact that this was paired with a qualitative assessment, where we went beyond just kind of the numbers and the assessment itself to discuss the suitability, potential error rates, levels of trust, levels of risk, and more with regards to each of the technologies. I'm conscious that I don't have a lot of time to speak to you about these, so I'll just try to run through some selected findings very rapidly. So you may remember from the previous slide that 2D codes were assessed to face fairly low barriers compared to other technologies. But when discussed, it was seen to be a fairly well-known technology amongst the participating experts. And it was also discussed as to whether these could contain whether these were kind of offered much added value. Actually, they're a well-known technology and they do face fewer barriers to implementation, and they have been applied. But on the other hand, there were questions with regards to whether they could fulfill, whether other technologies which maybe face higher barriers to implementation but could fulfill the same or similar purposes plus additional purposes who are not more relevant to consider. Also, the effectiveness of 2D codes to aid with physical security and stockpile management and reduce time-consuming processes was not apparent to participants, especially compared to other technologies which offered similar purposes. And there was also the mention of 2D codes could be intentionally removed, which would also impede subsequent tracing of items. So even though it's scored at fairly low barriers, as you can see from the discussions, there was some debate as to the utility of this technology. So whether it's not more worthy to invest in something that maybe faces higher barriers at the start, but has more utility in the end. Another example is that of RFIDs. They scored highly in terms of impact. It's also a technology which participants were quite familiar with. They noted, it can help with a number of things, such as physical security and stockpile management. They can help, scan a large number of tags at once, so you don't need to do as much physical inspection as others. But then it was also raised the issues of human errors and biases that could emerge from the use of RFIDs, also potential overtrust in technology, which means that you could have certain assumptions about the security of your storage facility, but nonetheless issues and errors could still occur, and you would still need to complement RFID with physical inspection and verification to really ensure that the technology is performing as it should. And this leads me to my final point on some of these findings, which is visible versus invisible technologies. So I mentioned, for example, chemical encoding is invisible, whereas our 2D codes would be very visible on a piece of small arm or light weapon, for example. So on the one hand, if it's visible, the actors would know to remove the marks. So there was a discussion, is invisible technology actually more useful, more resilient, because they can't be seen, they can't be removed in the same way. Covert markings could help avoid counteraction by illicit actors. But on the other hand, people mentioned that actually visibility of technologies could be a deterrent in and of itself. It could let potential offenders know that technology has been applied and therefore openly advertise elevated risks to these actors with regards to detection and identification. So again, this comes down to context and something which probably could be debated according to the issue at hand. And as you can see, there are many elements beyond the quantitative findings which could be of interest. We also sought to understand the broader systemic barriers which may be preventing the wider adoption and implementation of technologies, particularly given that the assessment showed that technologies could have a positive impact. So why are we not seeing technologies being adopted more frequently? Of course, the type and extent of barrier can differ depending on the stakeholder. And 7 key areas emerged from the discussions, some of which you may find relate more closely to your situation, others not as much. I won't go through all of them in detail, but several issues were brought up, namely the multiplicity of actors. So these different actors may not always operate in a cohesive and unified manner, which may lead to a fragmented landscape. And this has an impact on technology implementation, because technology implementation often requires harmonization amongst actors so that the technology can have the broadest impact. Cost was another major issue. It was the most recurring issue as well. And indeed, it is a very valid issue because we need to consider not just the cost of purchasing technology, but also training personnel that need to work with it, the cost of maintenance or replacement of elements or the whole solution, as well as enabling technologies such as computer networks, secure networks, cybersecurity, etc. There are also concerns that technology could, on the one hand, lead to exposure of weaknesses that may have repercussions for broader national security, and on the other hand, cause physical damage, such as by triggering explosions. So RFID there's a number of concerns raised with the use of RFIDs in storage, and whether that could not actually have a negative impact. And many of these concerns also pertain to digital and connected technologies and technologies that have GPS functions or have an electromagnetic signature. So here I'm really talking about the GNSS, so satellite and mobile tracking, RFIDs, and electronic seals, for example. There were concerns around technologies being compromised, such as through cyber attacks, or the ability for small arms and light weapons to be tracked and traced by harmful actors. And this concern was particularly acute within the post-delivery stage, when small arms and light weapons are stockpiled or during their active use. However, we didn't just stop at trying to understand what the barriers are, but also trying to understand what could be done to overcome these barriers. And here we kind of explored, or we kind of condensed our findings across 3 clusters, providing a non-exhaustive list of options and avenues which could be achieved at the national, regional, or international levels. So I'll just briefly go through the 4 areas. First, strengthening collaboration and interagency cooperation, such as by using pre-existing forums and multilateral instruments as a means to share knowledge and build capacity on these issues. Second, building up the evidence and knowledge base, where terminology is clarified and further assessments are conducted. This could be achieved by developing a common lexicon of technical terms, which could cover what a technology means and what it can and cannot provide in terms of information to increase understanding and trust in the various technologies. Third, undertaking institutional capacity building and individual training. This can be achieved by making funding available. So you previously mentioned receiving funding from the European Union. Again, kind of leveraging funding to this effect could be helpful. There could be also a focus placed on improving the retention levels of trained personnel and their knowledge, bearing in mind that this is a cost factor. And this could be achieved by putting in place specific knowledge management policies, whereby if an individual does leave a department or service, we ensure that their knowledge is retained and transmitted to the next individual in post. And fourth, reinforcing and establishing the appropriate physical, regulatory, and digital infrastructure, such as by ensuring that the core elements for data management and infrastructures in place. This could be achieved by implementing background data management systems to capture relevant data, and this should include agreement on how the data within these management systems and databases is managed and by whom. Indeed, data management, data security is really important. Overall, the findings show that the successful application of technology relies on certain building blocks, such as oversight, an enabling environment, the enforcement of frameworks, instruments, and processes, as well as broader political will. These building blocks are, of course, relevant to counter diversion efforts more broadly, not just paving the path to technology use. So I'm sure they resonate with you beyond just the discussion on technology. Just to conclude, these are the publications from which the findings in this presentation are based on, but really, of course, these are illustrative findings, and there would be merit in replicating such an exercise in specific countries or at the regional level to really enable the assessment of the technologies against specific needs and a specific context to make these findings more targeted. Indeed, going back to what I mentioned at the very start, technology implementation is context specific, and I really want to remind participants of the three-step framework developed to identify and assess the technologies to counter the diversion of conventional weapons, including small arms and light weapons, and its importance to the consideration of technology in this space. With this, thank you very much for your attention, and back over to you.
Ms. Sarah, a warm thank you is extended for the enlightening presentation. The significance of this topic is paramount, especially in today's global context, where innovative solutions are crucial to preventing the illicit spread of these weapons. The engaging approach made the complex subject accessible, sparking a lively and much-needed discussion among all participants. Extendemos un cordial agradecimiento por las ilustrativas ponencias sobre tecnologías para contrarrestar el desvío de armas pequeñas y armas ligeras. La importancia de este tema
The
es
importance
fundamental,
of this topic is
especialmente en el
basic,
contexto global
especially
actual,
in the global
donde las
context,
soluciones innovadoras son
where
esenciales para
innovative
prevenir la
solutions are
proliferación
essential
ilícita
to
de estas
prevent
armas.
the
La
distribution, the
ponencia ofreció
illegal
un excelente
distribution of these
equilibrio entre el rigor
firearms.
académico y perspectivas
This
prácticas,
academic
fomentando un
rigor
diálogo continuo sobre
and
cómo la
academic
tecnología puede ser una
practices
herramienta poderosa
promotes
para enfrentar
dialogue
este
on
desafío.
how
El enfoque
technologies
ameno
may be useful
hizo
to
que un tema
face
tan
these
complejo fuera
challenges.
accesible,
This
generando una
very
discusión
complex
animada
topic
y muy
was made
necesaria entre todos
accessible.
los participantes. Ahora abrimos la sección de
Now
preguntas y
we are going to open
respuestas
up for
para los
the
tres
question and
paneles
answer section
presentados.
for the three
Agradecemos
panels
a todos
that
los
were presented.
participantes por la gran cantidad de
Thanks
preguntas
to
enviadas.
everyone for the amount of
Lamentablemente,
questions
debido a
that you
cuestiones de
sent,
agenda,
but due
procederemos a
to
realizar
time
solo algunas cuantas.
restrictions,
Pero
we
nos
will just
comprometemos a mantener
some of
abiertos
them,
los foros de diálogo
but we will
para
keep our
satisfacer
dialogue
las
forums
demandas de
open
información
to
y
satisfy
responder
the
las
demands of
interrogantes
information
planteadas
and to
sobre los
respond
temas
to the
tratados el día
questions
de hoy. La primera
today.
pregunta que tenemos
So the first
es para
question
la
we
señora
have is
Yanaina.
for Ms. Janina,
Y dice así,
and it
estimada
says,
señora Yanaina,
Dear Ms.
¿qué
Janina,
desafíos enfrentan
what
actualmente
challenges
los
are being
países de la
faced
región
currently
para
by the countries of
implementar
the region
tecnologías
to implement
avanzadas
advanced
y buenas
technologies
prácticas en la
and good
gestión del ciclo de
practices
vida de las
in
armas,
the
municiones y
management of the life
explosivos
cycle of
y
the
cómo
firearms,
podemos superarlos mediante
explosives,
la
and how
cooperación
can we
regional?
overcome this
La palabra es
through
suya.
international cooperation?
Muchas gracias. Voy a empezar a invitar,
Thank you.
a
I'm
invitar
going to start
los
by
demás expositores para complementar. Si así lo
inviting the
desean,
other
en especial Walter,
presenters to
Sarah.
complement my response, Walter and Sarah.
Son muchos los desafíos,
There's many
pero
challenges,
hay algunos que se mantienen
but there are
a lo
some
largo del tiempo,
that
son
are
comunes a muchos de
being
los
kept
países
in
de la
time, and they are very common to all
tienen
the
que ver
countries,
con
and they
algunas
have to do with
debilidades de
some
estructura
weaknesses
que tienen que
in
ver con
structure,
recursos humanos,
human
equipos,
resources,
formación,
equipment,
remuneración de
training,
recursos humanos. Tienen que ver
also
también con
the
mecanismos
salaries of
de
the human
comunicación, de
resources, also
coordinación
the communication
entre
mechanisms
las
and coordination
autoridades y los
mechanisms
equipos
between
técnicos de
the
las
authorities and the
instituciones,
technical
y eso
teams of the
lo que se nota
institutions.
mucho en la región es un
And what
esfuerzo
we can
muy
see in the region is
consistente
that
y
there has been
continuo
very
de
consistent effort,
inversiones, de hecho se ha salido de un nivel y
and
estamos
we
ahora
have
en
come
otro.
out from one
Y
level
por
and
eso
we're in another
yo
level.
diría que la mejor
So I
manera
can
de
say that the
suplantar
best way
estos desafíos
to overcome these challenges is to continue investing articulation and improvement in the teams and in the people so that they may structure mechanisms, systems, protocols of internal articulation between the institutions that are involved. And this implies that we need to overcome challenges of articulation, of communication between the ministries or between different organizations of the same countries. But this also implies that this organization that we managed to achieve at a national level may also be reached at a regional level, as was explained by Walter and Sarah.
La proliferación y el tráfico es cada vez más
This proliferation and this trafficking is done through the borders to apply mechanisms that have to do with technology. If we don't do this regionally, if we don't achieve this implementation of information exchange and cooperation regionally, as a continent, as a hemisphere, we're not going to be able to overcome these barriers. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. ¿Algún otro de los participantes gustaría
Thank you. Any
complementar?
other of the participants would like to complement this answer?
Correcto. Continuamos con la siguiente pregunta.
Okay,
La
then we
siguiente
move on
pregunta
to the
va
next question. The
dirigida
next question is
a la
for
señora Sara
Ms.
Grant,
Sarah Grant,
y dice lo siguiente.
and it
¿Cuáles son
says,
las principales
what are
barreras
the
para la
main
adopción de
barriers
tecnologías
for
avanzadas
adopting
en el
advanced
control de las
technologies
armas
in
pequeñas y
controlling
ligeras?
of
¿Y qué acciones podemos
diversion
tomar para
of
superarlas a
small
nivel regional?
weapons? And how can we
Ms. Sarah, the
implement these at a
question
regional
says,
level?
what are the main barriers to the adoption of advanced technologies in controlling the diversion of small arms and light weapons? And what actions can we take at the regional level to overcome them? Please.
Thank you very much for the question. One of the main ones, as I mentioned, comes down to cost, especially when you consider the cost ratio between small arms light weapons in and of themselves and the technologies. There may be reticence in investing this cost. And again, this was something that came up again, time and time again across the experts and the workshops that we held. But on the other hand, it's true that cost can sometimes be used as an excuse to not necessarily implement technologies. So it's also important to, while being mindful of the potential impact that cost can have and that it can be a deterrent, it's also important to bear in mind that sometimes it can be used as a way to perhaps detract from the issue at hand, because there will be cost savings down the line if there is improved counter diversion. Other key issues that I didn't have the time to dive into, but very happy to do so now, is just simply kind of very much the practicalities of technology adoption. So you need, as Janina very rightly pointed out, the personnel is a very important point. Technology doesn't happen in a vacuum, and you really need to have skilled personnel or specific entities or departments which are able to understand, but also implement and then monitor the use of technology. Technology doesn't remove the need for personnel, and it really does require kind of an investment in that space, perhaps even working also with entities that one may not be used to working with, such as the private sector, for example, because often they hold the keys to using technology, or even sometimes they host kind of data facilities, etc. So it's very important to bear that in mind. Of course, everything has advantages, but drawbacks. And there may be more or less willingness to work with different type of actors to develop and use technology solutions. Exactly. So it can be a very complex discussion in terms of What can be done to overcome some of this? Well, the first thing is really an education piece to understand whether technology is needed in the first place. I don't think we should jump to necessarily using or technology being seen as necessarily a solution to every issue. But when it is, then really educating people kind of how to use it, what are the challenges, maybe the potential limitations that a technology offers. Even though it can help with different types of technologies, can be very useful, they also face challenges and they don't answer all of the problems. So I would really emphasize that, and then really creating the infrastructure around the technology. So ensuring that cybersecurity is extremely strong, especially when we're talking about more and more digitized data or kind of digital communications, really kind of adopting good secure data sharing platforms and good data management essentially practices in the background, because there's some kind of core enabling frameworks that will need to be put in place before any of the technologies can really be applied to ensure that they can be used. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por sus interesantes respuestas. Lamentablemente, por cuestiones de agenda, no
Thank you for
tendremos
your
tiempo de realizar
interesting
alguna pregunta más.
responses.
Sin embargo,
Unfortunately, we
tenemos
don't
al
have
señor
time
Walter,
for another
si
question.
le gustaría realizar algunas
But Mr. Walter,
conclusiones
would
o
you like
destaques de sus
to
participaciones,
comment
le agradeceríamos
on the
bastante, ya que no tenemos mayor
participants?
tiempo para otra pregunta.
We don't have time for another question,
Muchas gracias.
unfortunately.
Únicamente quizás retomar estas
Thank you.
últimas
I
dos
just want
preguntas,
to
donde se
basically
destaca mucho
comment a
la-
bit
el
more
tema
on
de
these
nuevas
last two
tecnologías, el
questions,
papel
where
que
we're
puede
talking about the new
jugar el tema
technologies
de
and the
la
role,
innovación para fortalecer
the
el
role of
control de armas y
innovation to
la
strengthen the
prevención y el
control
combate
of
al tráfico y al
weapons and
desvío.
preventing
Me parece
trafficking
también que
and
es
diversion.
importante, como
I think it
mencionaba
is
Sara,
important, as Sarah was mentioning,
partir de un diagnóstico, partir de la
to make a
comprensión para que
diagnostic,
cada
to
estado, de acuerdo a sus
also
contextos,
comprehend,
pueda
so that
definir
every
hasta qué
state, based
punto
on their context, can
las
define
tecnologías,
if the
tomando en cuenta pues, el
technologies,
abanico de opciones que
taking
existen,
into account
pues
all the
cuál es
different options
la
that
que
we
mejora
have
condiciones de
available,
seguridad,
which
como
is the
tenemos
one that
conceptos
is
para evitar
applicable
no realizar
based on the
inversiones que
context, so
posteriormente
that
puedan
we don't
no sostener o
make
mantener en el
investments that are
tiempo. Por otro lado,
unsustainable
también hay que
in
pensar
time.
en aspectos
And
cuando
also
hablamos
we need to
de
think on
innovación.
aspects such as when we talk
Innovación no
about
siempre
innovation,
es igual a
innovation
tecnología,
is
entonces
not
también es
equal to
importante buscar
technology. So we need to look
otras
for
formas o
other
modalidades
forms or
también
modes of
creativas para
creative
identificar
modes
qué aspectos
to
se pueden
identify
innovar en
which
materia de control de
aspects
armas
we
y
can
de
innovate
políticas
uh,
relacionadas. Lo
in
que
terms
mencionaba
of
con
the
respecto al
policies.
intercambio de
And
información, me parece que es
with regards to
sumamente
exchange of information, I think this
y
is
esto solo
highly important.
retomar la experiencia de algunos
And
países que han hecho algunos
there's
países
some
de la región
countries
es, por
we need to
ejemplo,
look at
hacer
what countries
alianzas
have been doing to establish partnerships,
alianzas público-privadas, por ejemplo, con
or like,
actores
for
como la
example,
academia.
public and private
Se han
partnerships,
acercado,
for
por
example, with
ejemplo,
the academia,
a academia, universidades,
for
para
example,
buscar
universities, and
soluciones
in order to look for
tecnológicas
technological
para edificar
solutions
o
and
construir
to build
una infraestructura que
an
pueda, digamos,
infrastructure
sostener
that
las
may
necesidades de
sustain
información
the
de las
needs of
diferentes instituciones
information
que están
among the different
ligadas o que tienen
institutions
algún
that they are linked with,
mandato en materia de control de
or
armas.
that have any type of
Me parece que
mandate
por ahí
as far as
pueden
weapon
ir
control goes.
algunos insumos de
So
mi parte con respecto
this is
al
my
tema tan
contribution in
importante
this
y tan
very
poco
important
explorado como
topic
el tema de
that it
innovación
hasn't been
y
explored
aspectos de
enough,
nuevas tecnologías
such
en
as
Internet. Muchas
innovation
gracias.
and technologies in these topics. Thank you.
Agradecemos mucho a nuestros panelistas por sus excelentes intervenciones. Lamentablemente, como les comentaba, no tenemos más tiempo para preguntas. A continuación pasaremos a
Unfortunately,
un
we don't
breve
have any more
descanso
time for
y
questions,
estaremos
so
de
we're going
vuelta
to
con
move.
ustedes a las 11:35 hora de Washington. Muchas
We will be
gracias.
back with you. We're going to move to a break. We will be back with you shortly.
Únete a nuestros eventos virtuales en octubre y noviembre. La Junta Interamericana de Defensa te invita a participar en 2 eventos clave que abordarán temas de gran relevancia para la seguridad hemisférica. Seminario Hemisférico de Ciberdefensa. Fecha: 31 de octubre de 2024. Hora: 8:45 de la mañana, Est. Plataforma: transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Un seminario que reunirá a expertos internacionales para discutir los desafíos y avances en ciberdefensa, fundamentales para la seguridad de nuestras naciones en el entorno digital. Inscríbete. Seminario de Prevención, Respuesta a Desastres y Empleo Aeroespacial. Fecha: 6 y 7 de noviembre de 2024. Hora: 10 de la mañana, Est. Plataforma: transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Este evento reunirá a expertos sobre el tema que a su vez ofrecerán diferentes perspectivas sobre lecciones aprendidas y buenas prácticas de las Fuerzas Armadas, seguridad pública entre otros organismos internacionales que han empleado sus capacidades en operaciones de ayuda humanitaria. Inscríbete. Seminario sobre flujos migratorios en el hemisferio. Fecha: 20 de noviembre de 2024. Hora: 9 de la mañana, Est. Plataforma: transmisión en vivo por YouTube. Este evento reunirá a expertos sobre el tema. Compartiremos lecciones aprendidas, experiencias y buenas prácticas sobre la actuación de las Fuerzas Armadas en el control del flujo migratorio, teniendo en cuenta la situación que atraviesa el hemisferio, acciones de respuesta en coordinación con diferentes instituciones del Estado e incluso con otros países para el control del mismo, y otros temas de interés. Inscríbete. Todos los eventos son gratuitos y abiertos al público. Asegura tu lugar inscribiéndote hoy mismo. Junta Interamericana de Defensa, promoviendo y fortaleciendo la confianza y seguridad hemisférica.
Participe dos nossos eventos virtuais em outubro e novembro. A Junta Interamericana de Defesa convida você a participar de 4 eventos essenciais que abordarão temas de grande relevância para a segurança hemisférica. Seminário Hemisférico de Ciberdefesa. Data: 31 de outubro de 2024. Hora: 8:45 da manhã, Este. Plataforma: transmissão ao vivo pelo YouTube. Um seminário que reunirá especialistas internacionais para discutir os desafios e avanços na ciberdefesa, fundamentais para a segurança das nossas nações no ambiente digital. Inscreva-se. Seminário de Prevenção, Resposta a Desastres e Emprego Aeroespacial. Data: 6 e 7 de novembro de 2024. Hora: 10 horas da manhã, Este. Plataforma: transmissão ao vivo pelo YouTube. Este evento reunirá especialistas sobre o tema, que oferecerão diferentes perspectivas sobre lições aprendidas e boas práticas das Forças Armadas, segurança pública, entre outros organismos internacionais que têm utilizado suas capacidades em operações de ajuda humanitária. Inscreva-se.
Join our virtual events in October and November. The Inter-American Defense Board invites you to participate in 4 key events that will address topics of great relevance to hemispheric security. Hemispheric Cyber Defense Seminar. Date: October 31st, 2024. Time: 8:45 a.m. Platform: live broadcast on YouTube. A seminar that will bring together international experts to discuss the challenges and advances in cyber defense, fundamental to the security of our nations in the digital environment. Register now. Seminar on Disaster Prevention, Response, and Aerospace Employment. Date: November 6th and 7th, 2024. Time: 10 a.m. EST. Platform: live broadcast on YouTube. This event will bring together experts on the subject who will offer different perspectives on lessons learned and best practices of the armed forces, public security, and other international organizations that have used their capabilities in humanitarian aid operations. Register now. Seminar on Migration Flows in the Hemisphere. Date: November 20th, 2024. Time, 9 a.m. EST. Platform, live broadcast on YouTube. This event will bring together experts on the subject. We will share lessons learned, experiences, and best practices on the role of the armed forces in controlling migration flows, considering the situation facing the hemisphere, response actions in coordination with different state institutions, and even with other countries for its control, among other topics of interest. Register now. All events are free and open to the public. Secure your spot by registering today. Inter-American Defense Board, promoting and strengthening hemispheric trust and security.
Muchas gracias. Reiteramos los buenos días a nuestras distinguidas audiencias.
Thank you very much. We reiterate good morning to all attendants in your house in Washington, D.C. And we are going to make preventing traffic of firearms, explosives, and others. And thank you so much for staying online. And for those of you who are recently connecting, we remind you that the presentations are enabled for you later on. We continue with panel number 4 according to the political official of the United Nations, UNODA. She works for Disarmament Affairs. Frida Thomas is a master's in political sciences and international studies with a master's in international relations and international security. Currently, she's an official in political affairs at the Office of Disarmament Affairs of the UN. Since January 2018, she has broad experience in management of programs and international policies on peace, security, and arms control, specialty in the prevention of illegal traffic, firearms, munitions, with proved skills in the cooperation, international, multilateral diplomacy, and management of projects focused on global security. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning to colleagues and guests. So thank you for inviting me and for giving me the floor. So I'm Frida, and I'm joining from UNODA Office for Disarmament Affairs here in New York to discuss some key practices to address illicit small arms and light weapons throughout the life cycle, mainly from a global perspective. So I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, we wait with you in order that you present it.
Can you see? Not yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
There it is. Now we are looking at your presentation.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay. So, as I mentioned, I will first talk about some of the policy commitments and recommendations to illicit small arms and light weapons and how they can really move from policy to action, and then share some good practices that we have gathered earlier this year from over 100 countries through their national reports on the program of action on small arms and light weapons. And lastly, I'd like to touch a bit on the need to tackle illicit small arms issues from both a demand and supply perspective. So thank you for your attention. So since I'm from the UN, I'll start by looking a bit at the global frameworks that guide small arms control. And first, I want to take us back to 2001, when the Program of Action on Illicit Small Arms and Light Weapons, the POA, was adopted. This is a politically binding instrument designed to tackle the illicit manufacture, transfer, and circulation of small arms and light weapons, and also addresses the humanitarian and socioeconomic consequences at all levels, from individual, national, regional, sub-regional, international. Then in 2005, the states adopted the International Tracing Instrument. This requires states to ensure that weapons are properly marked and that records are kept. And this process, of course, is vital for effective tracking throughout the life cycle. And These two instruments are being reviewed by states every 6 years, and the most recent review was this year in June in New York entitled the Fourth Review Conference of the POA. Separately in 2001, the Firearms Protocol was adopted and later entered into force in 2005, which is the first legally binding global instrument on small arms and light weapons, and part of the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. Also, the Arms Trade Treaty was adopted in 2013 and entered into force in 2014. Also a legally binding instrument which regulates the international trade of conventional arms. And finally, in 2023, last year, the global framework for through-life conventional ammunition management was adopted. And this is political commitments on safe, secure, and sustainable ammunition management to prevent diversion, illicit trafficking, and unplanned explosions at munition sites. Now, of course, these global instruments are only effective when cascading down to the regional, national levels. And the goal is really to translate into legally binding or tailored agreements that suit the specific regional and national context. And we heard earlier this morning about relevant frameworks in that regard. However, a lot of reporting to these global commitments does happen at the local, national levels. For example, for the Program of Action and the International Tracing Instrument, states are encouraged to submit national reports every 2 years on their implementation. And this process is not just about compliance, but also allows us to gather good practices and identify areas in need of support. So now when talking about really the life cycle of small arms and ammunition, wanted to just touch a bit about that, what it does include, and some of the key components. So from national legal frameworks, are national laws in place and in line with these international standards? Also, are there structured platform for dialogue between the various entities, such as small arms and light weapons commissions, for example? Manufacturing, are there controls in place and oversight of manufacturing process, which can then help also any unauthorized production or distribution? Marking, of course, are weapons properly marked at time of manufacture, and record keeping if there are accurate and accessible national registries. Pre-transfer controls, risk assessment are the mechanisms to evaluate the risk associated with arms transfers, and also throughout the transportation if there are effective controls over the movement. On tracing, if there are established system for tracing weapons back to the source, and of course, if stockpiles are secured to prevent theft or misuse. And also diversion monitoring and analysis, if there are analysis of how diversion actually occurs. And also if there are measures to monitor and address illegal arms sales. And finally, also the collection of weapons, how that is managed to ensure that they do not re-enter illicit markets. And if there are protocols for the destruction, safe destruction, and surplus of weapons. Also, cross-cutting issues such as gender mainstreaming, how is a gender perspective integrated into all these aspects? And considering the different impacts of small arms and light weapons and the illicit trade. But also on youth, for example, how are young people involved or being educated on risks? And then, of course, as we've discussed this morning on new technologies, how are emerging technologies posing both challenges and opportunities across the life cycle? So a few words on these global instruments. They do address the entire life cycle. The Program of Action provides the political commitments from manufacturing, marking, record keeping, transfer, storage, disposal. This does not explicitly cover ammunition. And then the ITI, which then requires states to mark weapons at the key points of the life cycle. At the fourth review conference that I mentioned before, states really emphasized the need for more effective implementation and identified some key areas, including the importance of addressing both supply and demand sides, of course, on new technologies, responding to the technological advancements, importance of increasing international cooperation and assistance, as well as on gender and youth mainstreaming. The global framework for through life conventional ammunition management also addresses what takes a life cycle approach for the safe and secure ammunition management through 15 objectives, from supply chain transparency to the end user certificates in use, to marking and tracing, diversion analysis, and also for securing stockpiles to prevent misuse. Now, of course, for translating some of these policies into practices, there are some UN guidance and tools that can be leveraged. I wanted to mention, for example, the Mosaic, the Modular Small Arms Control Implementation Compendium, which is a tool designed to turn these objectives of the global agreements into more practical guidance to prevent illicit trade and misuse of small arms and light weapons. So the Mosaic provides guidance based on good practices and codes of conduct and standard operating procedures. It's been reviewed by technical experts from around the world, from around 300 external specialists and involving 24 partner entities within the UN system. And there's also, of course, other similar guidelines for ammunition. There's the ammunition technical guidelines. There's also the international mine action standards, for example. Just on the Mosaic, I do want to just show the life cycle approach to small arms and light weapons that these guidelines take. So from through 6 series of guidance, from the setting small arms control into context in preventing armed violence, security sector reform, and DDR processes. In this also series 3 on legislative and regulatory aspects, which includes manufacturing, international transfers, and use, national regulation of civilian access, national coordination mechanism, criminal justice response. And there is 4 on design and management, which focus on designing and implementing national action plans on illicit small arms and light weapons, as well as monitoring, evaluation, and reporting. In terms of the operational support, the Mosaic modules covers stockpile management, marking, tracing, collection and destruction, and some of these other aspects that I just outlined, as well as the cross-cutting issues. So these modules are, of course, fully voluntary and can provide a step-by-step guidance for implementing effective small arms control at both national and regional levels. In addition to these types of guidance and standards, another good practice is the use of tailored assessments to assess within a certain context, the baseline and performance towards some of these international frameworks. The 4th review conference on the program of action did encourage the use of voluntary nationally owned baseline assessment in order to identify needs and provide as a way to address the whole life cycle of small arms and light weapons. In support of this, self-assessment tool for the Mosaic is being developed by UNIDIR, and this tool will be in form of a software designed to support countries in assessing a national small arms control system based on good practices from Mosaic. So just wanted to highlight that is coming soon. and will cover over 2,000 assessment criteria that can be used in helping countries in identifying where there is need for improvement or where performance is good throughout the life cycle. And there's also the Ammunition UN Safeguard Self-Assessment Tool, and also want to mention UNIDIR's Weapons and Ammunition Baseline Assessment, which is another methodology for national level assessments. And finally, you may know that last week in New York, the states came together for the Summit of the Future and adopted a pact for the future. And prior to that, in 2023, the UN Secretary General also adopted a policy brief entitled A New Agenda for Peace, where he provides recommendation for sustainable peace. And one of the key actions identified is on reducing the human cost of weapons. And the key practices and recommendations are the development of regional and sub-regional instruments and roadmaps to tackle challenges related to diversion. Secondly, setting national and regional targets and data collection and monitoring to meet those targets. And third, in pursuing whole of government approaches to illicit small arms and light weapons. And that also takes into account development and violence reduction, for instance. So now with that, I'd like to share some good practices for combating illicit small arms and light weapons that have been identified through national reports submitted this year as part of the program of action. So as I mentioned, states are encouraged to submit reports on national implementation to the program of action and international tracing instrument every 2 years. This year, 100 reports were collected covering the period of 2022 to 2023. And these are analyzed to identify both needs for assistance, but also to highlight some good practices, because as we know, the issues of illicit small arms and light weapons are, of course, national, regional, but also global in their nature. So one of the indicators or that states report on is on national targets. This is one good practice that has been identified and allows for a monitoring progress tailored to each country's reality. The number of states that are establishing national targets is gradually increasing. In the last reporting period, 30 states reported having set such targets. And these can be made either before or after creating national action plans, if that is relevant. And if they are set before a national action plan, they can help formulating it, but also creating more specific and measurable criteria. Some challenges around this is that has been reported by states is both the absence of baseline assessment to know where improvements are needed or gaps are existing, but also difficulties in projecting resources and the resource needs. Some good practice here does include the integration and synergies with national targets with other targets such as development and integration into comprehensive country assessments or development frameworks, or aligning with, of course, regional programs or roadmaps. Then in turning to the marking of weapons, the trends from the national reports on the program of action shows that the number of countries that are marking state-owned weapons increases, and in 2024, 81 of 100 reported doing so. And the number of countries capable of marking also continues to grow, which is really linked to a success of international assistance efforts, which we also heard a little bit about before. And more states are also considering the developments in small arms manufacturing, such as modular weapons or the use of new materials and 3D printing. So the number of states that has the capability of really looking at those aspects in marking does increase. However, there are only 65% of states that are reported that they are 65% report that they are unable to address the technological developments like this. So that is still one area in need for improvement. And we did hear especially from Sarah before, on some of the good practices that are existing and for different methods for marking as well. And that's something that also the technology can support. If moving to some of the practices to prevent diversion of small arms and light weapons, in last year, a total of 36 states reported that they collecting information on diversion incidents from international transfers, which is an increase from previous years. And that is an encouraging sign that more countries are actively monitoring diversion risks. And also, more states have the capability of collecting information on diversion incidents from national stockpiles, for example, with a small increase. And some of the challenges still there are that many states do lack the capacities, and also that diversion data is often considered confidential or sensitive, which can limit information sharing and analysis across countries. Some good practices is, for example, establishment of a database for sharing information on diversion incidents within the POA and the ITI reporting database, which allows states to exchange information securely and effectively to build more, to identify the trends of diversion. And this is available on smallarms.un-arm.org/diversion. And looking at destruction, which is another part of the life cycle of small arms and light weapons, we see that activities have been steadily maintained with an kind of annual destruction rate at approximately 500,000 weapons reported through these reports. And of course, this is one way to terminate a weapon's life cycle and ensure that they do not pose future threats. Some challenges are remaining in terms of costs, but also technical requirements, and is also an area consistently in high demand for assistance. Positively, there are several programs and funding opportunities for support in destruction efforts. There's also we see through the reports some innovative ideas for reusing materials from destroyed weapons for more safe disposal, but also minimize environmental aspects, etc. And finally, wanted to highlight also the role of the gender considerations in small arms and light weapons control, where states have made significant strides, showing growing commitments, and we see that more states report incorporating gender aspects in their work on illicit small arms and light weapons, so up to 74% in 2024. And some challenges in terms of data collections persists. And some good practices are really to establish gender-responsive programming and policies within national control systems across the life cycle. So really mainstreaming this perspective at all stages of the life cycle, but also for coordination with, for example, women, peace and security focal points at the national level to ensure that these linkages can be made more efficient. Now, as to the final part of my intervention, wanted to highlight one important point, which is to effectively address illicit small arms and light weapons, which is then to tackle both demand and supply simultaneously. The recent debates, at least in the program of action meetings, have underscored that the success of global cooperation on illicit small arms and light weapons really also depends on addressing both aspects, and not only focus on supply or demand, but looking at how these sides are interconnected. So if we're breaking down this a little bit, so what is driving the demand for small arms and light weapons? We've heard some points being raised earlier today, but that can also be such as security concerns, armed conflicts, where individuals or groups might seek small arms for self-defense or participation in conflicts, and also illicit economies, gang culture, civil conflicts and tensions between groups often also foster the demand. But it can also be economic instability, unemployment, poverty that can push people towards more criminal activities and the illegal acquisition of small arms and light weapons. And some other points that have been included in the more recent discussions by states on the program of action is, for example, on how health and mental health can push or raise the demand, but also, for example, how gender roles and norms associated with men and women in the acquisition of small arms and light weapons illegally. So if shifting the focus to the supply side, where do the illicit weapons come from and how they end up in wrong hands? Often they do start off in legal markets and can be manufactured legally, but are then diverted into illicit markets due to long lifespans and complex control systems. One risk factor is the control of borders, but also, of course, the stockpiles that can that is also aspects that are important to address and to identify at all stages throughout this, where the weapons become and goes from legal to illegal. And that includes also considering the different regulatory regimes and understanding the various forms of illicit activities. And so in many regions, common forms of diversion include theft from stockpiles, as well as unauthorized exports, undocumented secondhand sales, cross-border smuggling, but also, as we've seen, the new technologies and manufacturing, which we also saw from Walter and in other presentations. So again, coming back to marking and tracing as a good practice, really the role of manufacturers also have a responsibility in marking and the small arms, as well as parts and components that are produced, which can help trace the weapons journey from production to end users as a critical part of preventing diversion and illicit trafficking. Comprehensive record-keeping practices is also important, where manufacturers should document details like serial numbers, production dates, destination information for each firearm. And these records are important to ensure both transparency and accountability. Then also requires due diligence processes to complement the pre-transfer risk assessment that are then conducted by national authorities and providing an additional layer of security in arms transfers. Finally, information exchange and cooperation between manufacturers and national control authorities is also an important step to facilitate more holistic approaches to small arms control. So if looking at the supply network of small arms, it is complex web involving multiple actors. And as shown on this screen, there's a bit of the complexity of the network from manufacturers, exporters, carriers, transit entities, brokers, and other intermediaries. And understanding these is effective for the supply chain control, as well as the interpersonal connections and collaborations at each steps. This often requires systematic and continuous monitoring of the entire supply chain and tracking the movement of weapons from the manufacturing to end users. And also in terms of the important role of, I want to mention on customs authorities and law enforcement at the point of origin are often first line of defense against small arms diversion, as custom and law enforcement agencies need to identify and monitor and intercept potential shipments of illicit weapons. And this really includes having the right technology, expertise, and resources, as well as good tracking systems and standard operating procedures. So in summary of this, just to highlight that the demand for illegal firearms are influenced by social factors that are also intersectionally linked to the supply side. So the effective arms control does require a more holistic approach that consider the broader context of socioeconomic factors, political stability, and governance structure, but also focusing on the supply and demand dynamics and identifying root causes and drivers at both ends for developing more targeted strategies. So all in all, it's a shared responsibility among all stakeholders, including states and national authorities, as well as private sector and producers, for example, and industries. So with that, I'll thank you for your attention, and I'll leave over to you. Thank you.
Ms. Frida, please accept our sincere gratitude for the valuable presentation. The importance of this topic is undeniable, especially in the context of international initiatives such as Mosaic, which serve as a fundamental tool to help states effectively regulate and control small arms and light weapons through their entire life cycle. We are convinced that your approach made the global efforts towards a safer world more accessible to this audience and will contribute to enhancing safety and control in this critical area. Reciba nuestro más sincero agradecimiento por la valiosa presentación sobre buenas prácticas en la gestión del ciclo de vida de las armas y municiones. La relevancia de este tema es innegable, especialmente en el contexto
The
de
relevance of
iniciativas
this topic
internacionales
is
como
undeniable,
Mosaic,
specifically
el
in
cual constituye una herramienta fundamental
light
para
of
ayudar a los
initiatives such
estados
as
a regular y
Mosaic.
controlar de manera efectiva
The
las
states need
armas
to
pequeñas y
regulate
ligeras a
effectively
lo
the
largo de
small
todo su
arms
ciclo de
and
vida.
light arms
Su
throughout their
presentación
life
destacó
cycle.
enfoques
Your
prácticos
presentation
perfectamente alineados
highlighted
con las directrices de
practical
la ONU y los esfuerzos
approaches
mundiales en
aligned
esta
to the
materia.
UN guidelines.
Finalmente, en el panel número 5
In panel
contaremos con la
number 5, we
participación
will
del
have the
capitán de mar y
participation
guerra
of
Antonio Carlos
Captain,
Revelo
War
Loreiro,
Captain
profesor asistente en
Antonio
el Colegio
Carlos Revelo
Interamericano de
Loureiro,
Defensa, quien presentará el tema
and he will
gestión de
be
riesgos en la
presenting the
seguridad
topic
física de
risk
arsenales.
management in the
Mi capitán Loreiro
physical
es un
security
destacado
of
oficial de la
arsenals.
Marina de Guerra de Brasil.
He is an
Ingresó al
officer
Colegio Naval en 1991 y continuó su formación en la Academia Naval en 1994, siendo declarado guardia marina para el año
at the
1997.
Navy Academy in
Ha tenido
1994,
una destacada carrera,
and he was
pasando por
declared
diversos
Marine
cargos y
Guard in 1997.
responsabilidades,
He has had
incluido
a
el comando de la
very
fragata
good
Independencia
career
y el
on
buque
with different
patrulla Guaratuba.
responsibilities
En 2020, se unió
as
al
a
Estado Mayor de
commander
la
of
Armada de
the
Brasil,
Fragata
trabajando en la
Independencia
División de Análisis y
and
Desarrollo de
Buque
Estrategias
Patrulla
Interclanes.
Guaratuba. In 2020, he
Es egresado
joined
de la clase
the general
63 de la
staff of the
Maestría en
Army of
Seguridad y
Brazil,
Defensa
working in the
Hemisférica del
Division of
Colegio
Analysis and
Interamericano de
Development of
Defensa, y
Strategies and
actualmente es
Doctrines.
profesor asistente de las
And currently,
asignaturas
he
de
is the
Planificación
assistant
Estratégica,
professor of
Estudio
the
País y
assignments of
Metodología de la
strategic
Perspectiva.
planning and methodology
Sin
of
más preámbulos,
perspective
cedemos la
of the
palabra a mi capitán Loreiro.
IADC.
Thank you very much. I'm so grateful for Inter-American Defense Board for invitation. Muchas gracias. Yo soy muy grato, mi honor para mí para ser invitado para este panel con tan ilustres speakers. Para fin de interpretación, yo voy a hablar en portugués. Yo voy a compartir mi tela. ¿Conseguem ver?
Correcto, mi capitán, lo escuchamos y vemos su presentación.
Sim. Então, boa tarde a todos. Vou falar
Good
devagar para
afternoon to
facilitar a
everyone.
interpretação.
I'm going to,
Coube a mim comentar sobre gestão de risco
for
na
me, I need
segurança
to,
física dos
I'm
arsenais.
going to talk about the risk
A
management
apresentação
and
terá
physical
slides
security of
em
arsenals.
espanhol e em
The
inglês
presentation
para facilitar
will
a
have some slides
comunicação.
in English and in Spanish.
Minha primeira referência para falar disso é o
The
reporte
first
anual
reference to
da
talk about
UNTOC
this topic
sobre
is the
exatamente
annual report
sobre o desarme, programa
that talks
específico de
specifically about
desarme de armas convencionais.
disarming,
Eu
the
não comentei no
program
início, mas
disarming
minha abordagem
of
vai se
disarming
limitar
of conventional
aos
weapons. I have
arsenais
talked about this
convencionais.
before, but
aspecto
approach will be limited
interessante
to our conventional
nesse ponto
arsenals.
é que apenas 57 países são
A very
parceiros nessa
interesting
iniciativa da
thing is
ONU
that
de
only
desarme e
57
desarmamento
countries
mundial. Olhando para o mapa, percebemos que
have
os
been
principais
partnering with the
fabricantes
UN
de
for
armamento
the global
não fazem
disarming.
parte dessa iniciativa.
The main
Não cooperam ou
manufacturers
nem
of arms
interagem
are
com
not
ela.
part of this initiative.
E a América Latina
They are
como um
not
todo
interacting with this.
participa
And in
dessa
Latin America
iniciativa,
as a whole,
incluindo Cuba, Nicarágua e
Latin America
Venezuela.
is participating in this initiative, including Cuba, Nicaragua, and
Detalhe que
Venezuela.
gostaria de apontar, a apresentação
A
da
detail that
senhora
I would
Frida
like
Palma
to
sempre
speak
comentou
about in
sobre
the
os desvios que
presentation
podem ocorrer
of
nos
Mrs.
arsenais.
Frida, she
Há
talked
dois
about
riscos
the
principais nos
diversions
arsenais:
that happen in
desvios
the arsenals.
e
There's
que nós
two
chamamos de
risks,
voltação
the
de segurança
diversions and
e explosões acidentais, que nosso
the
sistema da
security
proteção.
and
Porém,
accidental
gostaria de fazer
explosions.
uma volta ao tempo
So what
para
can we do for
discutirmos três
protection?
pontos
We're going to go back in
fundamentais
time to
na comunidade
discuss
internacional
three main
desde
points
2020 para cá,
for
que
the
podem
international
ter causado, na
community
minha opinião
since
e minha análise,
2020
uma
up to now that might
distorção
have caused,
entre esse tráfico
from my
ilícito
point of
de
view, a
armas.
distortion
O
between
primeiro foi a
the
pandemia,
illicit
em
trafficking of
2020.
weapons. The first one
Nesse
was the
momento,
pandemic in
o crime
2020.
organizado
So at that
começou a se
time,
expandir.
the
Enquanto
organized
o produto
crime
interno
started to
bruto dos
expand,
países do mundo estavam caindo, o crime
while
organizado
the
cresceu
GDP of the countries
estatisticamente
was
quase
coming
3 a
down.
4 vezes,
This
expandindo para
trafficking
outras
grew
regiões.
about
Então,
3
hoje
or
em
4
dia, por
times.
exemplo,
It
temos
got
cartéis
expanded to other
mexicanos
regions. And
e
today, for
PCC
example,
no
we have
Brasil
Mexican
e
cartels
disputando o território da Europa.
and in
Este
Brazil
crescimento
that are fighting
provocou que
for
nessa época
territory
da
in Europe.
pandemia,
So this
dos
growth
maiores
provoked
consumidores de armas
during the
ilícitas
pandemic,
era o crime organizado, não eram os estados.
which it
E
just
nessa época se
drove
questionava muito
the
que não
organized crime
ocorreria
during the
mais
time.
conflito
So
interestatal.
at
Porém,
that time, we
em
thought that
2022,
more conflicts
inicia a
among them.
guerra
But in
Rússia-Ucrânia,
2022,
com uma demanda não
the war
esperada e
between
não
Russia and
planejada
Ukraine
de
started,
armamento e
and there
munição
was a
convencional
very
para este
unplanified,
conflito.
unplanned demand
Vários países contribuíram para isso.
for that conflict.
Junto com esse aporte,
Several countries
surgiu também a
contributed to that.
necessidade de aumentar seus
And so,
investimentos em
in
defesa,
addition to that,
o que aumentou
there was a
muito
need
a
to
demanda
increase the
por armamento
investments in
convencional.
defense. And this increased also the demand for conventional arms. Germany and Japan are examples, for example, who triplified their arms for defense. And therefore, they displaced the axis of offer for Europe and Asia, and the organized crime was left with
O cume disso tudo aconteceu ano passado,
a lack of
quando
attention. So
isto iniciou, ou, na
the
verdade,
height of this
ampliou
happened
o
last year
conflito que estava latente
when there
no
was a
Oriente Médio
conflict
e com Israel e Hamas, e que
in the Middle
hoje em
East
dia
with
já está expandido para
Israel and
praticamente
Hamas, and
grande
now
parte do
it
Oriente
is
Médio,
getting expanded
considerando os eventos de
to a
ontem,
big part of the
o
Middle
lançamento dos
East.
mísseis balísticos. Cada vez que se
Since
constrói um armamento,
yesterday,
se exige mais armamento. E
there was
quando esse
this
armamento é
also
direcionado para os estados,
participation from
chamamos de
Iran.
agenda legal,
When the
obviamente
weapons
há
are
impacto na
directed to
economia
the states, this
ilícita,
illegal
há impacto
selling
na
of
economia
arms has an
crime
impact
organizado.
in the
Por
illicit
que eu falo
economy.
isso?
There's an
Porque
impact
se eu
on the
não tenho
organized
mais uma
crime
fonte
economy. So why am I
internacional
talking about this?
de
Because if I don't
armas,
have an
é
international
claro que eu vou
source of
buscar
weapons,
nos arsenais
it is obvious that I'm
nacionais
look
dessas armas.
for the
E a
national
demanda continua vigente.
arsenals for
Vamos
those weapons
defender
because the
o
demand
crime
is still
organizado
there.
nesse território,
I need to
tem
defend
interesse em
organized
lutas mais
crime.
graves,
I need to
pelos
defend
planos
the
necessários
territories,
de
the
adquirir
interests of
armamento.
the
Na
people.
minha
So
opinião,
there's a need
esta
to
época que
acquire
estamos
weapons.
vivendo
So in
é
my
a
opinion,
mais perigosa
this
para
season that we're
todos os
living in is the
arsenais
most dangerous
nacionais
for
dos países
all
da
of
América
the
Latina nesse
national
momento.
arsenals of the countries of Latin
Então,
America.
nesse repórter anual, voltando agora para um pouco mais da
So in this
técnica
annual report,
das Nações Unidas,
going back
observamos
to the
que
technical part of the
basicamente são
UN,
5 pilares
we
que
observe
sustentam o
there are
combate
5
ou
pillars that
a
sustain this
armamento ou
combating.
o desarmamento. Entre eles temos a prevenção de segurança de armas e controle de medidas,
Arms
que
have
incluem
here
os
the
arsenais.
prevention and
Há uma
security
relação direta,
measures
como
for
comentei já,
arsenals. There's a
entre
direct
armas
relationship
ilícitas, crime organizado e
between
conflito armado.
the illegal
Essa
arms,
relação
organized
é uma
crime,
relação de
and
interdependência entre
war.
eles.
This is
Então,
a
quanto mais conflito tem,
interdependence. There's
mais
an interdependent
possibilidade de armas eu
relationship
terei,
among them. So
lícitas
while
e
there's more
ilícitas,
armed
que
conflict, I will have
operam
more
esses
arms
conflitos,
available for
arrefecer
illicit
e reduzir,
trafficking.
vão normalmente tendem a ir para o crime organizado. Esta é uma lógica
And these
que se
tend to go to the
repete a cada
organized
vez que
crime.
o
So
conflito
this is
ocorre.
a logic that is repetitive every time there is an armed conflict.
Les pedimos un momento de paciencia, por favor. Tuvimos un
Please
inconveniente
have
técnico por
patience
parte de
for a
nuestro
moment.
expositor.
We had an
Estaremos de vuelta
interruption.
en breve.
We will be back briefly.
Mi capitán, ¿está usted de vuelta? Lo perdimos por unos
My
instantes.
captain, are you back? We lost you for a few
Essa é a
moments.
positiva ou a outra?
El inicio de esta misma, mi capitán. Está
You
usted
were
hablando
starting on
de la primera
this
imagen.
slide.
Perfeito,
You were talking
graças.
about the first image.
Então,
Thanks.
então temos, em português, perdão. Então temos a questão das fontes de armas ilícitas e vamos especificamente
Then
falar sobre a
we were
insegurança
going to talk
dos
specifically about
arsenais.
the insecurity of the
Então, a ONU, a
arsenals.
UNIDIA especificamente, montou uma ferramenta,
So
kit de ferramentas que permite analisar os
UNIDIR
riscos
has
ou
set up
não
a
do
tool
arsenal de cada país.
that allows to
Abrange
analyze the
basicamente
risk
5 áreas
of
grandes de risco.
the arsenals per
Nós
country.
vamos focar apenas
So
na
there's
quinta
5
área,
areas of
que
risk,
tem a ver com o gerenciamento
going to
de
be
armamento e
focused on the
munição.
5th area that has to do with the management
Dentro
of
dessa quinta
weapons
área,
and
temos
ammunition.
2 fatores de risco.
So
E
within
vamos
this 5th
focar no
area, we
segundo,
have risk
suas capacidades
factors, and we're going
nacionais de
to be focused
gerenciamento
on the second
de
one,
armamento
the
e
national
munição,
capacities
e dentro dele,
for
ponto de
the
vista
management of
específico
weapons and
é
ammunition.
gerenciamento de
And one
arsenais.
specific risk point is the
Então,
management of
quais são os
arsenals.
indicadores que essa
What are
orientação
the
da UNIDIA
indicators
nos passa
that
para
this
avaliarmos como está o nível de segurança dos nossos arsenais?
that we need to
Primeiro,
assess
se há
to
uma força de
assess
segurança
the
nacional
security level of our
responsável por
arsenals?
gerenciar.
First, if you have a national security force
Depois,
that is
se a
responsible for
informação
managing
de
these,
armas e munição
then if
perdidas
the
ou roubadas
information
são
about
transparentes,
the
há
diversions of
uma
weapons
transparência
and ammunitions or lost
depois de
ammunitions
ter
or stolen from
alcançado
the
data
arsenals,
da frequência de repetição do que
this
ocorre
information
nesses
needs to be
ataques.
available. Also, the
Porque os
information
arsenais,
about the
como eu disse
frequency
anteriormente,
where
e nessa época, na
of
minha
the
opinião,
attacks
mais
to the
ainda,
arsenals.
serão fontes
In my opinion, at that time,
suprimento de
at this
armas
time,
para o crime
the
organizado.
arsenals are a source of
E a frequência e
attacks
letalidade,
for
nesse caso,
organized
para a
crime.
manutenção das explosões que não planejadas e previstas em lugares de armazenamento de munição.
Also, the protection for unplanned
Além disso, vamos ver
explosions
também em 2021
in ammunitions
elaboramos o
warehouses.
terceiro seminário
Then in
temático sobre
2021,
procedimentos para gestão de
there was
munição.
a third seminar about
Levantei aqui os pontos
procedures,
principais. Uma gestão
and
de
I
riscos
have
adequadas
put
para
here the
prevenir
main
explosões
points,
acidentais,
the risk
a
management
ocorrência de desvio de munições
to prevent accidental
aos usuários não
explosions,
autorizados,
the diversion of
no nosso
ammunition to
caso, muito
users that
forte,
are not
questão do crime
authorized
organizado.
or non-desired.
Não há marco internacional
In our
específico
case,
respeitado
organized
por
crime,
todos.
there's no
Isso é
specific
importante.
international framework that is respected
E
by all. This
também
is
a
very
falta de
important.
marcos específicos de
And
nível
also, there's a
mundial,
lack of
regional e
specific
subregional
frameworks
de
at
como
a global
reagir
level,
a esse
regional and
problema.
sub-regional level, and
Entretanto,
how
como
to react to
ressaltou
this
a senhora
problem.
Frida, as
However,
diretrizes técnicas
as Ms.
internacionais de
Frida
munições,
highlighted,
a
the
IADG,
technical
são muito
guidelines,
interessantes
international
e devem
guidelines
ser
about
seguidas por
ammunitions
todos
are very
para uma orientação
interesting, and
técnica
they must be
autorizada e validada
followed by everyone
internacionalmente
as
sobre
technical
como
orientation to
evitar
assess
que ocorram
internationally
explosões
how to avoid
acidentais nos arsenais.
explosions, accidental explosions.
Então, na verdade, quando
In
olhamos
the
o
arsenals.
gerenciamento, nós percebemos que temos
When we're
a
talking
questão da
about
gestão do
this,
ciclo de
we
vida,
notice that
como
we have
a,
two,
a senhora Frida comentou, ela tem a forma de ser
as Frida
seguro e
said, there's the
efetivo
cycle of life
e como garantir a segurança de toda a cadeia de
that needs to
suprimentos.
be safe and effective. How
Então,
to
temos três
guarantee
pontos cruciais.
the security in
Temos
the
que
entire supply
prevenir
chain.
as
So we have
explosões
3
acidentais e o
points
desvio de
that we need to
munições para
prevent:
usuários
the
autorizados,
accidental
ou
explosions and
seja,
diversion of
a gestão de
ammunitions to
munição ela é
unauthorized users.
multifacetada,
This
vai
means
mais além do
there's
que as medidas de gestão de arsenais
multifaceted,
apenas.
it is
Eu não estou falando sobre
multifaceted.
arsenais, mas a senhora Frida falou muito
I'm
bem
not talking about
do como todo.
arsenals, but Ms. Frida
É
talked
necessário as
really well.
transferências, como ela também comentou, uma análise de risco
It is
prévio
necessary,
e uma
as was said
monitoramento
before,
diagnóstico
to
muito
make
interessante
risk
serão
analysis
relacionadas
and
e é
monitoring and
importante
diagnostics.
diferenciar os tipos de desvio. Pode ser
And it
apenas
is
controle
important
nacional,
to
pode ser
differentiate
por causa da deserção,
different types of
o desvio
diversion.
dos arsenais existentes e sem poder identificar a causa disso tudo.
diversion of
Para
existing
minimizar isso,
weapons, the
os medidas de
causes.
controle são muito
So in order
importantes.
to
A
minimize
primeira,
this, we need
que
to
foi
analyze
ressaltada,
and we need to set up
mais
control
informação.
measures that are very
A
important.
necessidade de que haja mais informação para que
More
possa
information.
controlar a
There's a
cadeia de
need for more
distribuição de suprimentos
information
e
so
fatores de
that
demanda.
the supply
E
chain may
além
be
disso,
controlled
como já
and the
falaram
demand
todos os
factors.
expositores, a coordenação entre os
And
atores,
as everybody
tanto
said here
nacionais
before,
quanto
the
internacionais.
coordination between the actors, the stakeholders,
Uma observação,
internationally and
esta
nationally.
foto é de uma apreensão da Polícia Federal realizada este
This
ano.
picture here, in
De
this picture
2022
here,
a
we have this
2023,
seizure
aumentou
by
em
the federal
28% a
police
apreensão do
in
Brasil de
2023,
armas e
and this
munições,
has increased by
chegando a marca
23%,
de
the
11 mil
seizure
armas
of weapons in Brazil.
apreendidas. Não estou nem falando que não foram
So
apreendidas.
we have gotten
E
to the
esse
point
ano,
where
somente esse
we
ano,
have
até
seized
abril, foram
11,000
apreendidas
weapons.
4 mil armas, o que demanda que esse ano
So
será
up
maior que o
to
ano passado.
April,
Então, a segurança
we had
física das
4,000
nacionais é exigir
weapons.
segurança
And so this year we
que
will have an
aparta
even
de
bigger
fugas,
number.
roubos e perdas.
So we need to have
A
security
munição
measures
mal gerenciada,
that
ausência de
cover up
polícia de
for losses
segurança
as well.
aos nacionais existentes, durante transferências
Also,
principalmente,
we have a
conflitos também são a causa comum
bad
do desvio de
inventory
arsenais.
process for
E o risco da
ammunition,
proteção, que tem a
and
ver com as
also
explosões
there's a
imprevistas.
protection
Não
risk
apenas verificar o
that
efeito
has to
arma de
do with
explosão dentro do arsenal,
unforeseen
mas
explosions,
também o impacto, o efeito dela
not only
na
within the
área
arsenal, but
adiacente.
also the
E aí,
effects
conforme
in
a
the
senhora
neighboring
comentou,
areas. So as Frida said, the use of the IATGs are basic for the protection of ammunition. So the conclusions is basically we have two main risks, the protection and security risk, and we need to reduce the probability of and the consequences of accidental explosions and the diversion of ammunition towards non-authorized users. And the most important of all is how the national trafficking transcends the need for a coordinated response. So I wanted to put this, highlight this, that in the times that we're living in, when we have this conventional weapons demand that is increasing, this makes our arsenals more vulnerable to organized crime organizations. So when we talk about risk management, they are also talking about their risk management. So if you can buy cheaper outside, when it is too expensive, then they are going to look for a national solution. So please pay attention to this, and I hope this was useful. Thank you, and I'm ready for questions.
Muchas gracias, mi capitán. Extendemos un sincero agradecimiento por la interesante y
Thank you, my
relevante
captain.
presentación
Thank you
sobre
for this
gestión de
very
riesgos
interesting
en la seguridad
presentation
física
about
de
risk
arsenales.
management in this physical security of
La
arsenals.
importancia de este tema
The
no puede
importance of this
subestimarse,
topic cannot be
ya que una
underestimated
gestión adecuada de los
because
riesgos
an
es esencial
adequate
para garantizar la
mitigation
seguridad y
of risk
protección de
is
estos recursos
essential
estratégicos en
for
las funciones
handling
nacionales e
these
internacionales de
resources
seguridad y defensa.
in the
Su presentación no
defense,
solo ofreció un
national and
análisis profundo de
international
las mejores
defense
prácticas, sino
institutions.
que también resaltó datos
You also
estadísticos de
highlighted
programas
statistical
internacionales
data
y
of
nacionales de control de armas,
international and national
así como
problem,
políticas regionales
weapons
que abordan
control, and
problemáticas
regional
relacionadas con esta
policies
misma.
that address
Este
these
enfoque permitió a los
problematics.
participantes
This
comprender mejor
approach
los
allowed
esfuerzos
the
coordinados
participants
que se
to
están llevando a
understand
cabo en
better the
diferentes
efforts
niveles y la
in
relevancia
different
de una acción
levels
conjunta, además de
and the
promover
relevance
una
of
mayor
doing a
conciencia sobre
joint
la necesidad
action,
de
taking
implementar
joint
soluciones
action, and
efectivas
also
y
there's a need of
coordinadas para
implementing
proteger
effective
los arsenales de
solutions to
posibles
protect the
amenazas.
arsenals from
Este
different
tipo
threats.
de experiencias
This type of
no solo contribuyen a
experiences
fortalecer las
not only
capacidades
contribute to
nacionales,
strengthen
sino
the
también a
national
crear un entorno
capacities,
más
but
seguro para
also
todos.
create a safer environment for
Pasamos
all.
ahora a la sección de
Now we're
preguntas y
going to move on to
respuestas
the
para los
question and
paneles 4 y
answer
5.
section for
Nuevamente
panels
queremos
4 and
agradecer a todos
5.
los participantes
Thank you
por la gran
again for all
cantidad de
the
preguntas
participants for
recibidas.
this large
Sin
amount of
embargo,
questions
por
we
razones de
received,
tiempo,
but
solo
due
podremos
to
responder
time, we
algunas
may
de
only
ellas.
answer
Sin
some of them.
embargo, reiteramos que nos comprometemos a
But
continuar con estos foros
we
para
can
abordar
continue
las
with the
inquietudes
forums
y
to
proporcionar la
address
información
any
necesaria
questions
para
and
los temas
provide
discutidos
necessary
el día de hoy.
information for the topics that were
La primera
discussed
de las
today.
preguntas que tengo
So the first of the questions
es para mi capitán
are,
Antonio
the first of
Rivero
the question is for
y
Captain
dice lo
Revelo.
siguiente.
And it says the following: what challenges do the institutions face when implementing advanced technologies for the physical security of arsenals, and how may these be overcome through training and protocols of risk?
Gracias. Muito obrigado pela pergunta. Eu gostaria de aproveitar
Thank you for
pouco
this
do que
question. I would like to
doutora Sara comentou. Efetivamente, os desafios
speak about
estão
what Ms. Sarah said,
focar na
specifically
nossa
the
região,
challenges
na América Latina.
going to
Principalmente
be focused
conseguir
on Latin America
acesso
mainly.
às tecnologias. Com custo
So to have
elevado
access to these technologies has a very high cost,
tecnológico necessário para
and the
que cada país
technological
consiga
development is
fazer,
necessary so that every
primeiro, de uma
country
forma igual e consiga compartilhar isso com os outros países, de forma que
can
todos falem a
do
mesma
a
língua
specific
e haja uma
things
cooperação
in a
internacional.
specific way,
Então,
and
tem o
so that
desafio
all
do
the
custo,
countries can do it the
tem o
same
desafio
way,
do desenvolvimento
so we can
tecnológico,
have
conhecimento,
international cooperation. So we have
e
this challenge of
realmente
the
ele não é
cost
acessível
and of
a
the
todos os países
knowledge,
de forma
which is
igual.
not
Esse é um ponto. E
accessible
os
for all
protocolos,
the
eles
countries
precisam
in
ser
the same way.
padronizados.
And the protocols
Primeiro, dentro do Estado,
need to be
a
standardized.
compreensão dos protocolos ser
First,
seguidos por
within the
todos,
state,
e depois
the
entre
understanding of the
países.
protocols,
Como
they need to be
interatuar,
understood
como
by everyone, and
interagir
then
entre os países.
between the countries,
Isso é
how to
importante
interact
para
among
que
the
haja uma
countries. That's
compreensão
very
e que o
important,
esforço seja
so that there's an
não o esforço de um só,
understanding and that
mas o
the
esforço de
efforts
todos,
are
o esforço do hemisfério.
not just
Eu
of
espero que eu tenha
from
contestado
a
a pergunta.
single person, but it's a joint effort of everyone in the hemisphere. I hope I answered your
Muy
question.
agradecidos, mi capitán. La siguiente pregunta es para la oficial Frida Thomasen y dice lo siguiente: ¿cómo pueden las instituciones mejorar la trazabilidad y el control durante todo el ciclo de vida de las armas y municiones? The question says, how can institutions improve traceability and control through the entire life cycle of weapon and ammunition? Sorry, did you listen to us?
Yes.
Should
Thank
yes? Should I
Yes.
repeat the question or?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So the question is on how institutions can improve traceability and accountability. So I think one point I want to highlight on that is the importance of really taking hold of government approaches and working across institutions within governments, but also across governments. I mean, there are a lot of international tools in tracing. I mean, we have such as for Interpol's eye tracing instruments and other that can really serve also for sharing across region, but also institutionally. I think having a strong setup, a mechanism of information sharing with between law enforcement, customs, and others involved throughout, and taking this more whole of government approach. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Nuevamente agradecemos a nuestros expositores en nombre de la Junta Interamericana de Defensa y de la Organización de los Estados
We
Unidos.
thank the presenters of the IADB because of the knowledge shared, which will help us. And now it's an honor for me to present Major Brigadeiro Pinto, is Secretary of the Inter-American Defense Board, who will make use of the floor to conclude this important event.
Senhoras e senhores, boa tarde. Em nome da equipe da Junta Interamericana de Defesa, agradeço a todos aqueles que estiveram conosco no dia de hoje, participando desse workshop que abordou um tema de suma importância para a segurança do nosso hemisfério.
It's of great importance for the security of our hemisphere, the prevention of armed trafficking and arms and firearms and munitions and explosives, and collective commitment to have this cooperation and integrated manner. Have the biggest challenges during our event. We have had the opportunity to go more in depth on crucial topics regarding the management of firearms, the use of innovative technology to prevent the the war topics and others, and the exchange of experiences and knowledge imparted have made our reflections wealthier and richer, and has helped us for our collective capabilities. The proliferation and illegal traffic of firearms as a threat requires of coordinated and effective information, and we have to keep an open dialogue, and we will continue to work on alliances. The Inter-American Defense Fund reaffirms its commitment in supporting and promoting cooperation among the member countries or member states, offering necessary support for the development of these joint issues to allow us to advance on these topics. International cooperation, integration of different issues are important to manage the complex challenges that are present. We close this workshop with a conviction that, or with the thought that the knowledge received will serve as a base for new initiatives and partnerships. And I thank once again all of you who have contributed for the success of this event, and thanking you for an excellent day that we can continue together firm and determined on the construction of a safer and freer hemisphere of the due to the threats of illegal arms trafficking. I allowed to conclude this event with this reflection. Throughout this workshop, we have seen different approaches to manage responsibly and safely firearms, munitions, and explosives with international cooperation with advanced technology. It's important to remember or to remind that the security is not only physical issues, but the collaboration, transparency, and shared commitment with legality. Only through joint efforts, integrated and good practices will we be able to manage the risk in a wonderful way. On behalf of all the organizers, I thank the assistants for being here, and please stay informed of our new events and work together for a safer hemisphere. Have a wonderful day, and thank you very much.